Hey, this is Zac.
And I'm Clint, and we wanted to thank Exoterra for sponsoring this episode of Colubrid and Colubroid Radio.
Exoterra is the industry leader in glass terrarium enclosures, and we are a big fan of getting to see the species we work with both at home and at the university.
We utilize Exoterra caging here at Metazotics, and in addition to top quality terrariums, Exoterra offers an array of heating options, lighting, supplements, decor, and truthfully anything needed or wanted when keeping reptiles.
Thank you, Exoterra, for supporting Colubrid and Colubroid Radio. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Colubrid and Colubroid Radio. As always, Zac here with my brother from another mother, the one and only Clint Bartley. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, I'm doing good, man. I'm looking forward to this. This is one that's been in the making for a long time, so I'm stoked. I'm pumped.
Yeah. So in case you didn't see anything online, we're doing mites tonight. And we're doing it the CCR way. So nerd deep dive on the biology of mites, on the herpetoculture aspect of mites. And then we're really going to try to make it so that people understand how the drugs work, how the pesticides that we use to kill the mites work. And so to do that, we reached out to some pretty heavy hitters, for lack of a better word. I had a conversation with Dr. Warren Booth today, who studies the genetics of pest management, which is, pretty awesome. And then at the end of our episode tonight, we have Dr. Whitman, our resident vet, coming on because he's the guy that literally prescribes the drugs that we use. And I had a conversation with him over the weekend that was pretty telling. So if you've ever wondered how this stuff works, how the mites work, this isn't just a superficial thing. This is our deep dive. So we haven't done one of these in a while.
And I'll say this. I mean, Zac and I have had a conversation, going over a lot of this, because a lot of times we don't really prep, let's say, for a show because, we like for it to flow, a much more natural thing. But obviously with something like this, there's a lot of research and all that's falling on Zac.
Yes.
So it's kind of like Zac's getting all the science behind it, and where, my part and Zac's as well is how we've worked on it, throughout the years. And what I thought was amazing is I've got over 30 years in herpetoculture, and I've messed with mites, here and there throughout that and how to prevent it and how to fight them. Zac, you've done the same. Zac's a PhD, and we're both sitting on this phone call, like in awe with some of the things we've learned just from doing it. I mean, so this, like I said, this is definitely an exciting episode.
Yeah. So, but we also have more guests today.
We do.
Because our friends from RGI are going to be on talking about some breakthroughs they've had with hognose snake genetics. So we've pushed and plugged away at getting you all to send in the sheds, and we love when we have Ben and Kayla on to talk about what they found. So the science update tonight is basically them and me asking them some questions and them giving us some pretty cool answers. So they've had I'm excited for that as well. So this is a big one all around. But before we get to that, we're going to kind of go over our updates, and we always have updates. So I'll let you go first. What's going on in Metazotics land?
Yeah, sure. We've crossed the 700 egg mark so far for the year, and more and more coming. More alternative hit the incubator. A lot of really exciting stuff, and we still have things breeding that seem even in late. So Corey mentioned she just, I think it was yesterday, she caught our Exantic mandarins locked up, which, I mean, to me, that feels late. But then I was like, they went late last year. Or, well, they didn't, but our other mandarins went late last year. So that told us keep pairing what has not produced yet because, things are still happening. So I think we're probably maybe a week or so, maybe two, from having some albino San Diego gopher eggs, and that'd be the first Pituophis for us out here. So
that's cool.
That. We've also had several things hatching. We've had some green-killed lizards, bearded dragons, several ball python clutches, but we have had now some Nablocki clutches have hatched, and I want to say we've got some black rat morphs that just pipped today. So cool. It's all starting. It's that time, undoubtedly. So So that's great. Other than that's kind of been business as usual. The market update that we're going to do tonight, what I decided to do is we're about 6 months in, almost 6 full months into the year. And so I've done a little bit of a breakdown with Metazotics business percentages and things so that, maybe we can kind of throw that out there and give people ideas on what we're seeing and experiencing. And then hopefully they can turn that into, some results for themselves too. So,
Sure.
But all in updates here, we're doing great, man. We're chugging along, getting through the summer piece. And, we're in that, like, we're not in a slump, but we're in the time of year where it does dip
little
down.
lull.
Yeah,
and
the
boom.
natural wave, so
yeah.
Even during this slowdown period, things are still cranking and doing fantastic for us. So,
Sweet.
all good. How about you?
Well, like I've said the past couple episodes, to me it feels light, but then I look back on the past 2.5 months and I've left on overnight trips like 6 times. But I haven't been in the field since the last time we recorded, and so this has been a very long stretch for me. I cannot remember a June where I was home this much, and that was because Colin's graduating. So we had, Colin's graduation party and all the family stuff. But I also was using it as a way to force myself to write. And so the biggie for me is that I am tackling the Eastern hognose snake species account for the hognose book. And let me tell you something. I think I ended with somewhere around 400 citations that I had read on Platyrhinosis, the Eastern hognose snake. And I don't normally get intimidated. I don't normally get writer's block when writing. I've never been the let perfect be the enemy a good guy. I've always kind of just vomited crap onto a Word document and then cleaned it up, if you know what I mean. But I will say for the first time ever, that intimidated the hell out. There was just so much stuff to kind of digest and get to a point where I could make it not sound like tax code, which was kind of hard. So, yeah. I spent 10 days doing this outline, got the outline done. And then once I got that out of the way, writing was actually pretty easy. So tomorrow, knock on wood, I'm going to write up the reproduction section of that, and that account will be done. And draft, it's still like months from being completely done. But as far as the hognose book's concerned, that was my log jam. That was the thing that was keeping me from getting my responsibilities with the book done. I'm probably going to wake up anxious tomorrow morning at like 5 a.m. just to get this thing done. Because you and I share that. We don't sit and procrastinate. We attack. And I am looking forward to that draft being done because I can finally take a break, which means I'll take 12 hours off. So that's what a break is. But yeah, that's that. And then I've acquired a couple more snakes. I've kept on my locality kings and Pitchophis. The pits are working, which is pretty exciting. I've had a couple setbacks, but more positives than negatives. And one of my negatives was through brumation. This was the first time I ever lost snakes in brumation. And I have no idea why, but my male kankakee adult bull snake passed in brumation. And I have plenty of pure females sitting around here. And I like making kankakees. And I stumbled onto an adult male that I got for a very good price. So I'm back in the game with my kanks. And then I'm just kind of sitting here twiddling my thumbs, waiting for things to hatch. I'm pretty sure right after we recorded the last time, the first falsies hatched. And that was that clutch that was laid super early. So I have false waters on the ground. I don't have many. This was just a little clutch. I think I have like 9. That's not that many for falsies. The next clutch is a
light load. Yeah.
It's like 30. And they're supposed to go next week, along with my mad hogs and some king. Like I got a lot of things hatching next week. And next week, Colin and I will we're flying into California and then ending in Tucson. He likes the desert. This was his graduation present. And I'm doing my first lizard-based herping trip. I'm so used to doing snakes, but he's a lizard guy, and we're looking for Collared lizards, there's 3 species we can get. He's been infatuated with those since he was 6. Chuckwallas, desert iguanas, whiptails. If we're really lucky, a Gila. So I told him we will do lizards in the morning. We will get out of the heat in the middle part of the day. But if I'm drone all the way out there, you're crazy if you don't think we're looking for every snake we can road cruising at night. So that's next week, and I'm really looking forward to it because this is the first like big father-son trip Colin and I have ever done herping. So it's a good week. And those are my updates. Well, I guess I have other updates. Turtles, not colubrids, but reptiles. Yes. We breed those at the school at my Appalachian Aquatic Conservation Center. And we're breeding them. We're going to rear them, and they're going to be released back into the wild, which is super cool. This is something I've wanted to do since I was a kid, do release programs. And Tanya, my curator at the ACK, as we call it, we were able to get about a dozen eggs out of our spotteds, and several of those have hatched. And, baby snakes are cute, but baby spotted turtles, I don't use the word cute often. They're smaller than a damn quarter, man. Like, I looked at them and was like, I don't touch that. Zach touched that die. Like, that's literally what my brain did. I said to the student, like, I'm out. I cannot be near they're too delicate. And of course they're not, but anyway. So those hatched about a month ago, and I'm happy to say they've already doubled in size. So we're kind of onto something. We got them dialed in, and we have more eggs in the incubator. So there's that. And maybe next episode, I'll give a little tease. Maybe we will be able to finally talk about our conservation program that has been happening in the shadows and killing Clint that we can't talk about it.
I'm not tying my hands on making things. Yeah. I mean, still able to make some things happen, but not to the degree that I would like. So
yeah, no. So, but I have a conversation with our DNR, and I'm hoping, knock on wood for that one, that I will be allowed to talk about it. So, but it's a pretty exciting project that I'm sure our listeners will be geeked about. So.
You actually reminded me of a couple updates that I need to start writing this stuff down because it comes in and just goes out that quick. So we do have some new things here as well. Picked up, I now have, a trio of Stinson's pythons,
nice.
Adults. Yeah, so I mean, going to have and we're holding back some like granite spotted pythons, and I mean, so just trying to continue to diversify and work with some things that we haven't in the past. And on that same token, previously I talked about how we've worked with some wild caught animals, some Gonosoma, and getting our feet wet with those to make sure that we can handle wild caughts and, do the things we need to do for them to be successful. And we've had some very solid success, with that. So with that in mind, we just picked up a pair of, they are field collected, black Jensenii.
Nice.
And these things are, man, they're
I've had Jensenii. They're
smoking hot. So really excited about that. And because of the success we've had, we are now taking one of the bigger steps. For me, it's not necessarily the largest purchase we've ever made, but it's the largest with the risk that goes with it.
Yes.
And we've negated some of that risk. We actually we're doing an import. And we've partnered up with Jared Greer from KRE, and together we're importing a good number of snakes. And I'll go once they're here, and I'll report what they are and all that. But I mean, it's some neat stuff. It's not like unheard of in the trade. There's not necessarily captive in the trade for some of these, but they're out there. But we're excited to be able to get that because it'd be the first time that we've actually received a imported field collected animal directly without it going through, the middlemen in those hands. And so we're just kind of, again, not that that's necessarily the direction we want to go, but in order to continue to advance the hobby with more species in captivity, you've got to start with, some field collected. So we're trying to continue to get better at that. So that's one of the things when you talked about how nervous you were I'm like, well, this is actually what I'm nervous about right now. A lot of things could go wrong with this. So, but it's exciting at the same time, So
very cool.
Pretty pumped for that.
All right. Do you want to do the market update?
Yeah, and I'll do this one fairly quickly. So what I decided to do today was I'm basically going to kind of report some numbers, but these aren't the listing numbers that we usually go over. It's like I said, we're right at 6 months into the year. And so I like to look at our breakdown at Metazotics. So it paints a picture for me on, okay, where should we continue to, invest time, resources, energy, things like that. What are people wanting? What are the numbers telling me? What are the stories, I guess? So, a few things that I wanted to break down. First was, we always talk about our 3-prong approach. That was the mentality whenever I opened Metazotics, was we were going to move forward in 3 different arenas. The first would be in-store, which is what I consider local. The second would be shows, which is what I consider regional. And then online, which is what I consider national. And so with those 3 areas, if we were, performing, we should do well, because I just didn't feel that if you concentrate on in-store and local only, you're going to limit yourself, significantly. So, well, obviously I'm not going to give actual dollars. I don't feel that would be appropriate. I want to give some percentages here. First, I want to give our current comp. And for those that don't remember, comp stands for comparative sales. And so it's basically if we compare ourselves this year to the exact same time last year, how are we performing? Are we up? Are we down? How far are we up? How far are we down from that number at that exact point? Currently, we are operating at a 38.1% comp increase, which is huge. I mean, that's a really big one. And now, given the younger a company is, the bigger that number typically is. But we're now in our 4th year, and to be running nearly 40% comp is pretty incredible. And I thank everyone for getting us there. I mean, it's fantastic. Thanking all of our customers, and of course, all the team that is really kicking butt to make that happen. But now I want to break down where that money's coming from in terms of those 3 prongs. So our in-store sales are 69.7% of our business. And, that's, again, because the bulk of our business is going to be feeders, obviously. It's going to be your consumables. So I would expect the in-store to be there. But throughout this year, I've talked a lot about how solid online has been and how shows have really been, big for us. Online has made up 13.8% of our business. Shows have made up 16.5%.
Damn.
So we've actually had more business at shows than we have online. And we've done 26 show days so far this year. And what I mean is there's some shows that are 2-day shows, some days that are 1-day show. Sometimes we're at 2 shows the same weekend. So, but 26 show days versus online is 7 days a week. And so again, I'm telling you, the shows have been hot. Don't sit on the shows. And speaking of, the market update is brought to you by the Show Me Reptile Show. Missed that. But hopefully making you hear, I'm giving some big praise, because the shows are absolutely doing it. If you've got a Show Me Reptile show anywhere near you, get out there to them and support those that support us. By us, I mean those of us in the Colubrid community, because as we say, Colubrid Fest would not be happening if it wasn't for Mickey and the Show Me team. So give them your support. But then what I did was I wanted to go further, and I just wanted to look at animals. And I wanted to do that for the show because I know that most of the people listening, if they're interested in the business aspect and the breakdown, they're going to want to know a little bit more about the actual animal sales. So, I kind of split up our categories, and I've found one thing I thought was very interesting to me, and Ox kind of chuckled whenever I asked him, about it too. But okay, so right now, tortoises. Tortoises make up 0.9%, so 1% of our total sales. Not huge. Python. So everything that any python that's not a ball python, we're looking at 1.3% of our sales. Frogs, 1.7. Lizards, which includes bearded dragons, chameleons, uromastics, that's all lumped into there, 3%. Boas, 4.1. Geckos, 4.3. Ball pythons, 5.1. Colubrids, 11.7% of our overall sales. So, I mean, and that's a big, big number when you're thinking that's when I say 11%, that's including, you know, all your rodents, all that. So 11% of the entire pie is colubrids only. But I kind of also wanted to go into some averages, because this is where things get important as we have, you know, what I would call the macro events, when we see the economy go up and down, gas prices up and down, you know, the wars, the tariffs, all that. Your averages start to tell you, okay, if people are still spending money, where are they spending it? How much are they spending in a chunk? Okay, where are they comfortable? And I'm going to start with colubrids, since, you know, we're CCR. And yes, I've kind of said before that there seems to be a sweet spot that you want to stay in where the bulk of the transactions take place. And I give a range typically, but if I, you know, ever give a single number, like here's the number you want to be at. I said it before, and I asked Ox, I said, Ox, this is a test to see how often you actually pay attention to me. What's that number that I've given you, you know, that I say is, you know, where I think most people are comfortable when it comes to colubrids? And he says, wasn't it 250? And sure enough, the average dollar sale right now is $247.39.
There you go.
That's the average 6 months. So the reason I'm pointing that out, it's not that you won't sell them if they're lower or that you won't sell them if they're higher. But if you want to know where, at least for Metazotics, the bulk of the colubrid purchases are happening, it's right in that 250 mark. That's where people are the most comfortable. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Ball pythons, their average, 290. Huh. Now, I believe what we're going to see over the second half of the 6 months, the colubrid average will probably come up just a little bit because we're going to have more higher end stuff start to hatch. The ball pythons will probably come down just a little bit because we'll have some of the lower end ball pythons hatch, you know, during the specials, things like that. So that'll probably balance out just a little bit. Let's see, a couple other averages for you guys. Tortoises average 225. Pythons average 426. So the python buyer is definitely going to spend the higher number. Frogs, $66. Lizards, $201. Boas, $338. Geckos, $73. Kind of a few final numbers for you. So far this year, and I'm only saying this because we keep hearing the market is not there. The market is not there. We've already sold 1,247 animals out of Metazotics in the first 6 months. And we complain, if we take ball pythons out of the equation, the next thing that we always say is so saturated are crested geckos, leopard geckos, right? That's the next thing we hear. Guess what we've sold the most of, folks? Geckos, 396 of them. So, I mean, we can complain and say the market's not there. And I'm going to tell you it's BS. It's there. It's just not the upper echelon that, you know, we once wanted it to be. Finally, just to give you overall on snakes, snakes as a whole make up 17.1% of, you know, Metazotics transactions so far, or volume so far, with an overall average of 275. So take all that for what you want, you know, and what you think. Obviously, when you price your animals, you're going to want to price them for whatever the market is telling you they should be at right then, whether that's higher than what you thought or lower than what you thought. But I can tell you those numbers that we just went over, that seems to be where people are comfortable spending their money right now, where, you know, it's some are going to be a little higher, some will be a little lower, but the bulk of the population is right in those sweet spots. So hopefully that helps. And that's what I've got for the market updates.
Thanks, man.
No problem.
I always love when you break that stuff down, because even though it's economics, it's data, and that's the realm I dwell in.
And that's the thing that you and I can both geek out on, man, is data.
Yeah.
I love it.
Cool. All right. So for the science update, brought to us by Rare Genetics Inc., and I think we get to do something kind of weird in a good way, which is just they're here. So thank you.
Over here.
Thank you for sponsoring the science that comes out of CCR. So I could say it to you guys directly.
Love it.
Totally.
Okay.
Good to be here.
Yes, so we've done a couple of these now, I believe. This one's near and dear to my heart because we're hitting the hogs tonight. So I've got a couple like prompts I'm supposed to ask, but before we get into that, I just want to know how RGI is doing. So you guys doing well? Some are treating you well? I know I heard Ben's been in the lab and is going to be in the lab for the distant future.
The way I want you to picture Ben right now, the right way, Ben right now is like he is in the ceiling, like with just data going past his face. He's popping his head out to say hello right now.
Okay, and then it'll go right back in.
Exactly, yeah. And there's the cat. Hello, Potato is here.
Good. Yes, cats.
Yes.
Okay, so with that being said, why don't you just kind of give us an update on what you were looking into hognose, what you found about the hognose, and what's going on with hogs and RGI.
Yeah, Ben.
Yeah, so the biggest step we made, which I don't think we talked about on here, but we've certainly mentioned a few months back, is we did sequence the whole genome of the Western hognose. So that made it open the door for us to be able to design morph tests for hognoses. And so we do have an albino test and we have a conda test that are both available. And
very cool.
Many people use the albino test, and the conda one is pretty brand new. I think someone had 5 or 6 that I did the other day for both albino and conda. So
I do want to add the first person to get their results for the albino test was actually Hogalicious, who I saw in the comments. So hi, Hogalicious.
Nice. Awesome. Love it.
Got a bunch of good results. Yeah. So
yes. So yeah, and then today there she is. And then today, right before we were coming on, and Kayla was trying to get me to spill the beans before we started recording, but I wasn't going to. She's got away with one else. But yeah, today I let the bioinformatics person I work with hand in hand with to find these new things and said, hey man, if there's anything you can push for, I'm going to go on and talk about hognoses on a podcast. So anything you can give me. So he probably the last 45 minutes before I came on to talk with you all, him and I were shooting stuff back and forth like crazy. But anyway, I've got really good locations. Nothing for sure yet, but I've got really good locations for lavender and for toffee belly.
Nice.
So lavender and toffee belly are looking good. I may need to do some more sequencing to know for sure. So it may still take a month or two. I never know for sure. It's an iterative process. We may see really good stuff and then hit a point where we try some more and then it doesn't work. And then we have to go back and, start a few steps back. So I don't know for sure, but that was really, really good. And some kind of decent potential location for Swiss chocolate also.
Oh, cool.
We've got several more sheds that were sent in for Swiss chocolate. So we've got that going as well. And I know I have data before recording. Kayla was talking a little bit about hypo and caramel. And so I've got data coming probably later today or tomorrow on those as well. So lots of good stuff.
Very exciting.
Awesome.
Can you tell us anything about the kind of mechanism behind at least conda or anaconda? Like, is incomplete dominant? Like, do we support that, not support that? What's the deal with that?
So, and that's a question we get for various morphs.
Sure.
So when you're talking about a genetic test, so each gene, you're going to get one copy of code from your mom, one copy of code from your dad. And so the genetic test is going to tell you, okay, we know conda is this specific mutation. And the test is going to tell you whether you have 0 copies, 1 copy, or 2 copies.
Gotcha.
And so what the genetic test tells you is what code is there. For us to know whether it's incomplete dominant or recessive, it's up to breeders to decide. So unfortunately, I can't solve that for you. I can give you data so you can know for sure. Like
Sure.
orange dream and ball pythons, a lot of the time it's hard to tell an orange dream from a super orange dream or homozygous for orange dream. And so now with the testing, we can at least say, okay, that's for sure homozygous, that's for sure het, and that might help us figure it out. But yeah, the end of the road has to come to it's essentially a definition to help breeders, and it's from breeders. So I can't give you the final answer.
All good. All good. Okay. So final question. I know you have some updates with your website, some future plans.
Yeah.
Do you want to kind of tell everybody, because we were talking about this before the show started, and I was pretty geeked about it. So
yeah,
what's the deal with that? And we have a QR code, so go to the website if you're watching this on YouTube.
Yeah. So this is Sean's baby, technically, but I'm going to do my best to do some justice for it. So in a nutshell, our new website kind of looks very similar to our old one, but it's the back end of this website that's extremely special. And that kind of puts RGI on the cutting edge of reptile genetics and husbandry going forward. So like lock in, it's kind of extremely cool. Kind of extremely. So of course, you know, it's got the tests that we have 2 hognose tests. We've got 4 corn snake mutation tests, AML, lavender, scaleless, terrazzo, with more coming. We've got 6 boa tests, 4 blood tests, blood pythons, that is, not to get out of colubrid land, of course, but burns, retics, and maybe even a future hit for an anaconda mutation, like not the hognose conda, but like an actual anaconda. Maybe that's its own thing. But the back end of this, what makes it special is that our goal is basically to create like a 23andMe for snakes, where when you send in that shed, not only are you getting, you know, your animal tested for albino or whatever, but it is basically the back end is built on our website to store that pattern of like your animal's genetic signature of billions and billions of base pairs. So you could do lineage tracking. You could say, you know, hey, this test confirms that my animal came from this, kind of like they do with like horse stud books and what have you.
Cool.
You know, and basically how it works is whenever you order a test, oh, hello, the cat. No, please not right now. Every animal gets tested, gets its own static ID. That already happens. Its genetic signature is saved in our database. And the goal is basically what you can send in one shed, and potentially as we roll out new tests, you can have endless future testing for that animal with that one shed that you sent once. And so theoretically, that could someday, like even when that animal has been deceased for like 4 years, you could still technically test it for new tests. So, which is really cool if you're like trying to figure out, okay, where did this mute, you know, something weird pops out years later in a lineage, and you're like, where did this come from? You know, if a bunch of people had been testing, we could even track that back and figure out, you know,
that is cool.
Yeah.
It's also
So
powerful to help get rid of deleterious mutations.
Exactly.
So if you've been sequencing your breeders and something pops up like Stargazer or something like that, you could then look at the ones you already have in the database and know already, okay, I want to test offspring from these as potential carriers, stuff like that.
Exactly. And hang on. And the static ID is important because that stays with the animal even when that animal changes hands. So, you know, if you sell it to somebody, you know, like that stays with that animal. And so again, if you find something deleterious in it, you know, you can also let people know who've gotten offspring from that animal. Hey, this is what was found here. And likewise, you can also do it for positive things. Like I tested one of my hog noses for albino, found out that Mothman carried albinism. He's het for it, meaning that all of his offspring and all the babies, the 4 babies that I sold last year, one of them at Colubrid Fest, are now pos het albino. And I happen to have one of those babies' sheds left over just sitting on top of the snake rack. And so I was like, hey, Ben, test this. And I was able to tell the guy who got that hatchling that, surprise, your snake is also het albino. So that was really fun. So and the other thing, there's a lot of bells and whistles in the future of this website for us. But also it's really easy to just go in there, get your shed test, and get gone if that's all you're interested in.
Yeah. Well,
So
we'll probably be sending you the West Lib hog sheds. Yes. Fun story. I got those from a professor that was at UT Tyler. He retired. His name is Neil Ford. Many of you may know him. He's one of the authors on the garter snake book that I reviewed. And when he was retired and he had to get rid of his snakes, and he knew that I was getting into hogs, and he was like, hey, I think he had like a dozen. It was a 15. They're all from like the F1 straight out of the wild. And I was like, cool. Cause I was wanting that. Well, then we bred them and we got albinos, we got condas, we got Arctic. I was like, these did not come from the wild.
Busted.
But I was just thinking it'd be cool to actually know with our colony who has what.
Yes, exactly.
Because we have random morphs just pop out all the damn time.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Is that Sean in the chat? Because I didn't type that.
I guess it is.
It is Sean. Hi, Sean.
We invited you, Sean. It's your friends down here that didn't get the message.
Okay, so, Sean, tell me if I did okay talking about the website, because again, that's our guy. That's his baby.
Very cool.
Well, and I believe the coupon code still applies from CCR
yes, it does.
as well, right?
Yes.
Yep, there we go. CCR 15. Save yourself 15% on the testing. So
heck yeah,
very excited.
Okay. Any other tidbits? I mean, that was.
We didn't mention sex determination at all. So those of you that didn't know, we are able to test for most species. I think the only one that consistently gives us headaches are tricolored hogs, but most everything else. And actually, I think false water cobras sometimes give us problems.
I can give you sheds.
That would be good.
Yeah.
Yes,
please.
Hundreds of them if you want them. Okay.
You can use the code.
And I can sex them for you before you get them, so you know what we're dealing with.
Yeah, that's what we need, are proven sex sheds.
Done. That's happening.
Yeah.
Okay.
If y'all are okay. Oh, just back in the lab working, and I see y'all goofing off. Hi, Sean. What we would never.
Never goof off. Okay. Yes. Well, cool.
Yeah.
Real quick, we did just have somebody pop this question. Let you guys answer that. It says, how long can a shed be before it is no longer viable for testing?
Great question. And really what it boils down to is how quickly you get it out of the cage. What the biggest enemy is water, moisture, humidity. So if your cage is really dry, if it's a Western hog and your cage is pretty dry and they, shed it on a dry side, it probably will be good forever. I mean, I have some that I removed from the cage, dried out completely, put in a Ziploc, and they've been in one of my houses. They were in my basement, and then in this house, it's in my attic. And so temps have been all over, and it's been, I think, about 7 years, and those sheds still give me data. So, even at room temperature, you can just stick them in an envelope and put them in a filing cabinet or whatever, Ziplocs, and in a drawer. But they'll stay good for a long time.
Cool.
Yeah.
But if it sits in the water for like 3 or 4 days because you're out of town, and then you get it out and dry it, it's already toast.
Yep.
Okay. Good to know.
Yeah.
So dry, not wet.
There was another question from the same guy. He asked, are we allowed to send in any kind of snake shed or just for specific species? If you want to send in sheds for research, like if you see something we don't currently test for that you'd love to see a test for, what you want to do is send in just a little patch of shed skin. You don't have to send the whole thing. We've gotten full moldy bull snake sheds that have not dried fully before they sent it, and then it's het fungus. That's the only thing we could test. Thank you for laughing. And but yeah, make sure it's dry. Write down anything you know about that animal as far as its genetics. So any known sex, known mutations, possible mutations, etc. Ansie Bell said I sent in a shed for a gender test earlier this year for us guarded, and it worked for I just can't talk today for an Oregon spotted garter, and it worked great. Awesome. Yay, good. Yeah, it's awesome for your little tiny colubrids who you feel scared to pop or probe. Some people have magic fingers, and I'm not that person. So as soon as I have 2 clutches that are pipping over the next 2 weeks. You know, those bad boys are getting sex tested. I'm not even worrying about trying to pop them. So
Nice.
it's there for you. We're here for you. Use that CCR15 code to get a discount on your shed testing.
All righty.
Yeah.
Okay, guys. Well, thanks for coming on. We'll do this again. Anytime you have an update, you just reach out and you're on the next show. That's kind of how this went down. So thank you for supporting us, and thank you for doing the work you're doing, because you're making herpetoculture
Yes, thank you.
a better place. Oh, there you go.
I love it.
Nothing. You're CCR shirts. There we go. Cool.
You guys are the best.
Okay.
So are y'all. Thank you.
Yep. Have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay. So, well, we still have Ben, and he's gone. All right.
I think we're going to start moving into, about to say we're going to start moving into it. So first, let's give a shout out to ReptiChip. You know, as ReptiChip always is our sponsor when it comes to the meat of our show. And since we've got a guest a lot later in the show that we'll introduce, but we're going to go ahead and do the ReptiChip piece now. We want to thank ReptiChip for being a sponsor. We utilize ReptiChip out here at Metazotics. We use it really for anything that needs humidity. I know Zac, he uses it out there at the university for incubation. I know they just got a big shipment, in. I just got a pallet in this past Friday ourselves. So they are fully stocked, ready to go. Give ReptiChip a shout if you are in need of any cocoa husk.
Heck yeah. Okay, so I know a lot of our listeners listen in their car. This may be one that you might want to ultimately listen to it on your drive to work and then watch it on YouTube. I don't think I have ever made a PowerPoint to go the duration of the episode before. And last episode, I tried to make the freaking PowerPoint work for 2 minutes and couldn't get it to go. So I'm not sweating over this little technological blip that I do every single day of my life as a professor. But anyway, we're going to bring the PowerPoint up and pray that it works. But we're doing the PowerPoint tonight as visuals, because there's a lot of things that we're going to try to explain. And I don't know how to explain how acetylcholine works with neurons without an image. And I don't know if I can do that and have people understand it. So that's one of the reasons why we have this. Plus, we're going to be going over mite life cycle, mite biology, and there's visuals that we just need to do that effectively and efficiently. So, but we will do our best to explain in a way that if you do not watch it on YouTube, you can still learn. So by all means, stick with us now. So give a little bit of history. We haven't done a deep dive since I think the rat snake taxonomic episode, which was over a year and a half ago. Yeah. And I think you started talking about this last summer. Is that right?
Yeah.
And I kept saying, I need a week. And I did that for 55 weeks. So
this is what it's like working hand in hand with Zac Loughman.
Yeah, so. Exactly. So with that being said, we got a lot to go over in the next 90 minutes. So we're going to define what a mite is. We're going to talk about where snake mites came from. I thought I knew, I didn't. And it's actually a pretty fascinating story. We're going to cover their natural history and life history. I always say keep your friends close and your enemies closer. And I think a lot of times people are just like, I got mites, get the chemicals. But if you actually understand the biology of the beast, it's going to help you be more effective at killing them. And we also need to let you all know, there's so many freaking mites on planet Earth, and you can have mites in your snake tank, in your bedding, that are not the snake mite, Ophiuchus the nasty. So we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to go over how you determine if you have mites. Now, a lot of you are like, you'll see them. There are some kind of cues, because you'll learn that when they first hatch out of eggs, they're barely visible. And there are some things that can let you know there's mites there. And if you can get them early, you're going to deal with them much more effectively. So we're going to talk about that.
I'll say the older you get, for some reason, they're harder to see.
Yeah, notice how we both have glasses, and we did not have those before. So anywho, initial treatment. So you found mites, what do? How do you treat the rack, the vivarium, the tank, your room when the mites get in there? We're going to cover that. And then we're going to go over some drugs. Essentially, the drugs used to kill mites are basically insecticides. And so the idea of putting insecticides all over your snake should probably cause some trepidation. It certainly did with us, and I don't want to talk about that if I'm not truly qualified. And so that is when we're going to bring in Dr. Whitman, who graciously is giving his time tonight, and he's going to talk about 3 drugs that are used fairly commonly, including the one that a lot of people are interested in, which is NexGard and its equivalents. This is the oral treatment that's been in Europe for a little while now and is just now getting to the States. So with this being said, let's get on with the show. Okay, so first things first is just defining what a mite is. A lot of people know, because a lot of people are natural history minded, and a lot of people like arthropods, like herps. But essentially, a mite is an arachnid. So scorpions, spiders, whip scorpions, harvestmen, daddy long legs, those are all arachnids. Arachnids have 2 body segments. Insects have 3. Arachnids never have wings. Insects have wings. So they are very different. Arachnids are, as a general rule, considered to be more ancient than insects and crustaceans. And that's kind of an important thing for you to know. And one of the things that's really important that all arachnids share is their mouth parts. They have these structures that are called chelicerae. Now, the chelicerae are used differently in all the different arachnid lineages. We're not going to get into that. But in the case of mites, in parasitic mites, what they do with their chelicerae is they basically burrow those into the flesh of a particular prey item they're parasitizing, and then they open up the area that they are going to feed on. They will create a little tunnel. I'm trying not to get overly technical here, and then regurgitate or exude into that tunnel digestive enzymes. And those enzymes basically get rid of the clotting factors of the blood, and they keep it so that they can then slurp up not only blood, but body plasma. So the lymphatic fluid can occasionally be consumed, blood can be consumed, and the plasma that the blood is in is consumed. And when it comes to mite diversity, we're talking thousands of mites. And I can promise you're probably sitting in a room with hundreds of mites. They're just not, hopefully, parasitic snake mites. Dust mites are so prevalent in our environment that that we have evolved allergens to them. So as long as we've been living in caves and dusty places, there have been mites feeding on our dead skin cells, the dust, that's around. And they're an intimate part of our lives. I'm going to say this multiple times. It is extremely important that you as a snake keeper learn how to identify a snake mite. Snake mites act a little different than mites you'll find in substrate. And substrate mites can be, or wood mites they're sometimes called, they're detritus mites is what I would call them as a biologist. That's where you get mite diversity out the wazoo. So let's first talk about the snake mite. And the Latin name for the snake mite is Ophionisus nitricus. Ophi means snake. So the people that describe the snake mite quite literally put snake in the genus name for this particular mite. Snake mites have an interesting evolutionary history. They are not actually related to other lineages of mites that parasitize reptiles. They are most closely related from a taxonomic point of view to mites that you find in bird nests, which is kind of interesting. And bird nest mites evolved to basically get off the parent bird into the nest or make their way into the nest. And then they live in that domicile of the nest, and they basically bounce between the host and the nest. And that's where they complete all these different life history stages. So part of their life history is on a bird, a nestling. Part of their life history is in the nest. And what's really interesting is that's exactly what snake mites do. Snake mites have a key part of their biology where they aren't even on the damn snake. So for instance, we'll learn the eggs of snake mites are not laid on snakes. They're laid in the environment. And then that egg hatches into a larva, and the larva, hatches into another phase we'll talk about shortly. And then that phase is what finds the snake. So there's a period of time where a snake mite isn't on a snake. Kind of interesting. Well, that's what these nest parasitites do. Another thing that's kind of fun about snake mites is they're extremely rare in the wild. I've heard a lot of people say, I'm going to bring this in from the wild, but I got to bake it to kill all the snake mites. The likelihood of you bringing Ophionissus in to your collection from outside is insanely low. But it's not low for you to bring mites into your enclosure, because mites are freaking on everything if it's, in leaf litter and it's decaying. Yeah. The original description of snake mites, or the first person to really kind of look at them, were some biologists in Paris, where some freshly imported snakes from Africa were there. And there was an acariologist, that's what you call a biologist that studies mites. And he realized that these mites were on snakes, and he, gathered them up, put them on slides, did the formal description. And because of that, some recent work has looked at, like, where are they coming from? And all the molecular data that's been done points towards an African origin. And then obviously the original descriptions of them from the wild were only on African snakes. So what's interesting here is this is an us problem. We are the vector. If we don't have herpetoculturists, we don't have snake mites in the proliferation that we find them in, our collections today. And we are the people that are spreading them around. Okay, that is basically the way that they have gotten from point A to point B, and so that's that. And being a blood-sucking, animal, they are essentially, they're not closely related, but they are similar to ticks. If you know what a tick is, which most of us that have spent any time outside know what ticks are just giant glorified mites. That's what a tick is. And so these guys are blood-sucking ectoparasites of snakes. Ticks are blood-sucking ectoparasites of vertebrates. There's some that go on, reptiles, people, mammals, all that kind of good stuff. So, yeah. So that's kind of just some background information on the snake mite.
Real quick. So this is, now, so far, I knew this. Or at least this is, what I've been led to believe through conversations previously, that they had an African origin. Are there snake mites, from what you just said and from what I've understood before, they are not native to the U.S., correct?
This species of mite, which is the one that's in herpetoculture, is not native to the U.S.
And I wanted to ensure I was accurate in that. Gotcha. Yeah. I wanted to ensure I was accurate in that statement, because I've made that statement before, because that's what I've, been led to believe is, just like you said, typically, now bringing in a wild snake from out back, we may pull ticks off of it. We may pull something like that, but snake mites were never, a concern. Another thing I want to talk about, or at least mention here, when it comes to snake mites, obviously ball pythons were not the first African species to be imported, over here, and snake mites had already made it over, on them. However, this is something that just in my observation of, in my involvement in herpetoculture, snake mites weren't this predominant big thing until the ball python boom. Because if you think it, that's when really we were just, bringing tons of wild caught and farm hatched ball pythons started coming in by the, hundreds of thousands a year. And I think that's when we had a huge influx, of these hits. And, as you said, we're the vectors, and we've got, ball pythons are typically kept in rack systems. Mm-hmm. They're not kept in separate cages, or at least back then. So you would have 30, in a rack system in some of the more popular racks. And so this is where I think a lot of the big boom of these mites really came from in U.S. herpetoculture. I mean, is that something you would agree with, Zach, or what's your thoughts on that?
I definitely think that some more genetics came in with the influx of all the ball pythons. So yes, I also think if you picture the way that we do the mass breeding of ball pythons, which is they live in rack tubs. Oftentimes they don't live in the largest rack tubs. I'm not saying that we're like keeping them in little shoe boxes. It's just you're not giving them these huge things you might keep a boa or something like that in a rack. And you're basically creating a nest with a rack tub. And so one of the things we'll talk about at the end, which is where Dr. Booth and Dr. Whitman come into play, is the way that we treated mites. If you weren't hyper vigilant in your treatment, we essentially were creating super mites. We were creating mites that are resistant because of the way that not everybody, but a lot of people went about kind of thinking they were doing the treatment right. It wasn't bad intentions. But at the same time, if you don't do a total kill or get close to a total kill, evolution shows up and you end up creating these mite resistant mites. Then you take your ball pythons to the reptile show and you pick up a particular ball python, get the mites on your hands, go home. Now you're introducing these super mites to your collection. Like there's just been a lot of that's happened, but mites have been part of American herpetoculture. This was interesting since we've been doing it. So like they showed up in the early 70s. There were some articles that I found that were from like the 80s. It was interesting like reading those kind of old articles in like Vivarium magazine and things like that, because it was like an emerging threat. The snake mite were the titles of those articles. And what's kind of interesting is the way we treated them back then is still used for some of the preventatives we're going to talk about today.
And I want to make sure everyone understands this isn't ball pythons are the reason we have snake mites.
We are not saying that.
No. They were already here, obviously.
Already here.
I just think there was a boom that took place during the ball python mass import, because I don't really think that there was any other species, especially from Africa, that was imported nearly to the same degree and same numbers as what we experienced with ball pythons in such a short amount of time.
Sure.
And so I think there was a big influx that kind of catapulted these to an even greater population density than what we were experiencing previously.
Yep. Okay. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, and I know some of my students are going to watch this on YouTube, and they're going to be like, what the hell, Loughman? You said to only use one sentence per bullet point. And this is the wordiest slide I have made in the past 2 years of my life. But I did this on purpose. So if you want to learn about the mite life history, just hit pause on YouTube because it's all here on one slide. So basically, I love natural history. I love understanding the life cycle of animals. And I'm going to make an argument here that if you are really going to become a student of the serpent, like we say, and you're going to be effective at controlling mites, you have to know the life cycle. And the life cycle of mites is pretty interesting. If you don't know anything else, just know roughly how long you go from an egg to a reproducing female, because that is a very important time frame when it comes to you trying to kill them and get them out, because you've got to get out all the generations. So if you kill all the adults, but there's still eggs that haven't hatched yet, the eggs are going to be away from the snake. So if you're treating the snake, you're not going to be getting those eggs. If you don't come back and treat, those eggs are going to hatch. They're going to go through this life cycle, and it's just going to pop back up again. And so that's a key part. So the snake mite egg, it's laid in the environment. It's usually laid in the substrate, in cage corners, under water dishes. They oftentimes will go climb up and deposit their eggs on the side of a rack tub. If you have a PVC enclosure, they love to get in the junction point where two pieces of PVC come together. It's a little crevice. That's exactly where they would be laying their eggs. If you have an older wooden cage, just picture all the rough edges on a piece of wood that's not sanded. You've got a bunch of what we would call ovipositing sites. Those eggs are going to be, put into the environment, and they can, if they are warm and humid, warmth, 80 degrees, 85 degrees, humidity above 60%, you have created the ideal condition to have your mites go from egg to adult rapidly. If you are keeping them at more like we might keep a mandarin at room temperature, that's going to actually impact the total length to adulthood for the snake. So the temperature regime of your snake is going to dictate the regime of like how long they go from egg to adult. So most of these, well, this life history that I'm presenting, it's all based around the ambient. So you take your daytime low, you take the low in a 24-hour period, the high in a 24-hour period, you average those together. That would be the temperature we're talking about here. So an average temperature of 75 degrees is what's on this slide is presented to you as. So snake mite eggs are actually pretty large. They're for a mite egg. They're not tiny. The females can lay up to 20 eggs per blood meal. And they can normally do that 3 times. So a female can lay up to 60 eggs herself. And we'll get more on that, but I want to just kind of talk about where the eggs come from. They're in the environment, they hatch, and when they hatch into what is called a larva. So you all learned in biology class that arachnids have 8 legs. In the case of mites, when they first hatch out, they, as a larvae, only have 6 legs. They acquire their last pair of walking legs with the molt from the larvae into what we call the proto-nymph stage. And when they are larvae, they do not take a blood meal. They basically hatch, wander a little bit away from the egg, and sit there. And in the next 24 hours-ish, they're going to undergo a molt, and that's when they're going to metamorphose into the proto-nymph stage. You know you got a proto-nymph if it's a very tiny, tiny, tiny mite. You're going to need a scope to see it, but it has 8 legs. So now, at this stage, this is our first parasitic stage. And this is when the mites are making it from the environment to your snake. Okay? The proto-nymph is going to seek out the thinnest bit of skin it can find because its chelicerae are incredibly small. So the proto-nymphs are going to go into the mental groove, the groove that's underneath the jaw. We've all kind of flipped our snake upside down and spread that and, seen them there. They love, as many of us know, to get in the orbit around the eyeball because they can get up in there. They're protected from the environment because the eye is literally, protecting them. And there's a whole bunch of capillary beds in there that they can get into and get a blood meal on. They'll also, depending on the snake, get up underneath scales. But a lot of times the proto-nymphs are going to be hanging out around the head. Or occasionally, I read a couple things that said they'll go down near the cloaca and get into some of the tissue that's down there. And then these guys will feed on blood for 3 to 7 days. And when they take a blood meal, it's not like I got my chelicerae in there, slurp, I'm done. They're actually embedded in your snake's skin for hours, possibly days. And so while they're in there, getting their blood meal, after that 3 to 7 days, depending on the individual, they're going to drop off the snake and then they enter the environment again. So if you have itty bitty tiny little mites on your snake and they're running around, those are proto-nymphs, and those proto-nymphs were eggs like a day or 2 before you find them. And so you can also kind of age out when the mite infestation happened. If you don't have big blood-sucking adults, but you only have itty-bitties, this was a relatively recent possible invasion. If you've got big adults and the little guys on there, that tells you the mites have been in here for more than a week. That's a kind of a little bit of a forensics thing you can do based off the size of mites you're seeing. Once they take that blood meal, the proto-nymphs fall off, enter the environment again, and they are going to go and molt. And they molt into what we call the deutonymph phase. This phase is very different than the larvae. It's a non-feeding phase, but they are active. They're kind of walking around. So when you pull open your tub, you look in your viv, and you've got the big infestation, and you've got animals crawling around in the substrate, and you got the big blood engorged guys on the snake, and then you got the itty bitties. You basically are looking at multiple life stages all at once. So the deutonymphs are what you're killing when you're treating the substrate and you're treating the paper, or you're doing some of these future treatments we're going to talk about. So this stage only lasts a day or two. And then they are going to metamorphose into an adult. The adult is the sexual reproducing stage. This is the one that's going to make more mites. And the way that you can tell it is you're going to look at it underneath a scope, if you have one, a dissecting scope, and there'll be plates on the undersurface. The plates tell you it's an adult. If they don't have these plates, you're not dealing with an adult. You're dealing with a deutonymph or maybe a protonymph, okay? The adult is active, very mobile, and their job is to feed on blood, especially the females, because a blood meal equals eggs. They have to get food, just like we feed our snakes, the mite to produce eggs. The mites have to get blood in them. And if you look at the figure that's up here, figure number 5, that's a blood engorged mite. They actually have a stomach in there. When they're sucking the blood up into their bodies, their stomach has all these lobes called diverticula. And so they're going to fill the lobes. And when they do that, they can increase their size up to 1,500 times what they were before they took the blood meal. And we all know this. When you like hit those and you get a blood smear on your hand, that's what's going on. They will then basically engorge. It takes them 4 to 8 days to get completely, to that massive size. And then what basically ends up happening is after they do that, they're probably going to leave the snake, go lay eggs, come back to the snake, engorge again, leave the snake, go lay eggs, come back to the snake, engorge again. And that process takes about that process is going to take up to, I believe, 40 days. So the total lifespan of a snake mite, we think it's 60 days. But I'm going to say something. I've spent a lifetime studying animals, and until you get a poor graduate student who tracks Sally, the snake mite, from birth to death, these are estimates. We really, truly, it's disingenuous to say we know exactly. We have estimates based off of some studies that have been done. And like I said, she's fully productive. She's going to make 60 eggs. So that's our life cycle. What comments do you have about that, Clint?
So you said that when we were treating, it's the deutonymph.
Good job, bud.
I'm trying.
Yeah.
I'm trying. That's the stage that we're typically targeting.
Well, right? We're targeting that, and we're targeting the adults.
The adults.
And you're targeting all of them. Let's be real.
Well, I guess that was my question. Is there a stage that is more sensitive to
the
our actions?
are going to be real sensitive because they lack. We're going to talk about chitin thickness here in a minute.
Okay.
Their exoskeleton is thinner than an adult, and so chemicals will go from the environment across their exoskeleton, like through their breathing apparatus and into them a little faster than the highly chitinous adults, which are kind of at their ultimate stage and have a slightly thicker exoskeleton.
What about, I guess, so is the larva, would that be like where it's the weakest?
That's probably the weakest.
Okay. That would make sense to me. And so I just wanted to make sure that, I was on the same page as you. So, okay. Because it seemed like the less shell that it has, the easier it should be, to kill. So, okay.
Yeah.
All right. I'm with you.
So I've got the kind of highlight reel below the figure. A mite can go from an egg to an adult in as little as 9 to 11 days. They can live once they reach adulthood for another 40 to 60 days, we think. And then each time a female is able to fully engorge and drop off the snake, she has the potential to lay up to 20 eggs. So per clutch, and then she's going to potentially lay 60 eggs. So 10 females that get 3 blood meals, if they reach their full potential, is 600 mites. Yeah. And even so that kind of helps explain how they go from like a handful to boom, which, unfortunately some of us have experienced, myself included.
Yeah. Been there.
Okay. So another fun fact, when I saw this, I was like, oh, for the love of God. Come on. Yeah. So they can actually reproduce without having sex. So they can do parthenogenic reproduction. The way they do parthenogenesis, which is, reproduction where you get viable offspring without a fertilized egg, it's kind of interesting. It's hard for me to hate things being a biologist, because when you really look at parasites, they just make you realize that they're much better at this little thing called evolution than we are. So when they become parthenogenic, they're doing that because there's no males in the population. Well, the way that their sex determination works is the offspring they make are males. So you go from having no males in the population to suddenly they're producing males in the population, through parthenogenesis, and now you have males, females. You can get your heterogeneity and your genetic drift and everything we need to maintain a healthy population. So that's kind of fun. Another thing I want to talk about before we move on is these animals can also persist in the environment without food. Lots of cold-blooded critters, be it reptiles or arthropods or whatever you want to talk about, they have evolved a mechanism whereby if there isn't food there, they just kind of sit and wait, and they can wait a long time. There are anecdotal reports of mites going, there being 100, 200 days between I killed them all and now they're back again. In reality, they were probably lurking in the shadows there, present. The eggs can undergo what we call a diapause, so they can be laid in the environment, and if there isn't a host, they just don't hatch. Or they hatch into larvae that then go into diapause and wait for a host to show up. So a lot of times, I know you've said it, I've said it, like I've got this rack and I just can't get the mites out of it. Well, what's really happening there is the mites have gotten up into crevices and everything. We have treated the living snot out of it, but our pesticides are not getting to wherever the hell they're able to get. And so they're not being killed. They're waiting out that time period. And then when the environment gets conducive again, they reappear. I've noticed in my collection during the wintertime, it gets really dry and I don't have mites. And then I will usually get like one freaking tub. It's always one tub. There's 80 plus tubs in the garage. There will be one tub when the humidity starts to go back up again. And I get to about 4 or 5 days of 60, 65% humidity. Boom. I'm going to suddenly about a week later have a mite issue. So they're able to just wait out the environment until the environment is conducive for them. So like I said,
here. 1 second, Zach, I want to pause it here because I know right after this one, we're going to be getting into some deep stuff on taking care of them. So I think this is probably a good, good point for us to pause, being that we're going to go into some deep stuff. Thank another one of our sponsors, ZooMed. Max, can you go ahead and roll ZooMed for us?
CCR is proud to be sponsored by ZooMed Laboratories.
ZooMed has been servicing the reptile industry since 1977, and in 1993, they introduced us to the Repticide, the very first UVB bulb specifically for reptiles.
In addition to boasting a 1,200-item product line, ZooMed also has an extensive reptile breeding program, with many species being kept at their incredible greenhouse facility located in California.
Thank you, ZooMed, for supporting Colubrid and Colubrid Radio.
Thank you for your support, ZooMed. We certainly
thank you, ZooMed. Okay, so we've kind of covered our basic biology. Know that life cycle. Remember that life cycle when we start talking about treatments. It's super important. And so now we're going to kind of move on to something that I think is extremely important, which is that not all mites are snake mites. So a lot of keepers, I have one of my animal keepers at work, Lauren Mortz. She loves animals. Animals are her favorite thing on planet Earth. She would do everything in her power, and she will agree with me with what I'm about to say, to smite these things off the planet and turn them to dust. If we say we have mites, she will quite literally, like we got a mite issue here, she does a heebie-jeebie dance. So, I know that there's people listening to this that have the exact same response. And so what ends up happening is you open up your tubs, you look at your animals, you see little arthropods that look like commas walking on your snake, and then you immediately think it's a snake mite. Don't necessarily do that. Learn how to identify them. Now, is it okay, to wipe them out? Sure. But if you have a substrate mite, A, you don't necessarily need to freak out. And B, please remember that when you treat your snakes, you're coating them in chemicals or introducing chemicals, and we don't really want to do that if we don't have to.
Right.
That is something that we shouldn't be doing just at will. And when we get to resistance, that's quite literally how we get super mites. So we need to, a little bit of identification goes a long way. So get yourself a hand lens. I've actually had students, because, I say hand lens because I'm old AF. They whip out their freaking cell phone and put their cell phone on 10x and take a picture and then blow that up. And they're like, is this a terrestrial mite or a snake mite? And if you're using mulch, if you are going to Home Depot or Lowe's and doing the shortcut like I do and getting bags of substrate that sit out in the environment with rips in them, you're absolutely going to have infiltration of that substrate with mites and springtails and various arthropods.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then you're going to bring that in, and they're gonna love living in your snake's cage. You've got shed skin, you have feces that the snake's producing, you have all the things that they would be feeding on out in nature, and they can actually be part of your cleanup crew. And if you do bioactive, you got mites in your tank. Like, I'm sorry, you just have mites in your tank. The few really good bioactive tanks that I had here, I would actually take a glob of that to school and use it in my ecology labs when we'd be looking at soil invertebrates because of all the mites. And I had pseudoscorpions in one tank, which was really cool, but we'll get back to this. So please know mites are there. And this mite that we see on the screen right now, these are dust mites. And dust mites are in pretty much every human habitated dwelling on Earth. I'm not going to necessarily go over how to identify a snake mite, but go online. There are actually a lot of really good resources. Normally I don't say that. There's plenty of good mite resources out there. And snake mites are pretty easy to identify compared to other mites, in my opinion, anyway. So that's the thing with that. Okay. So now we've kind of done the biology. Now we're kind of moving into the herpetoculture piece. And I use this picture. There's a lot of pictures of ball pythons coming up. We are not trashing ball pythons. All the research and the publications has been done, most of them with ball pythons, because they're such a large part of our industry and herpetoculture in the private sector. And I also love this image. It's from my herpetoculture PowerPoints because it's from like 1998. So it just, yes,
and you can tell that because it literally has the year on the box.
Yes, it does. And it's a fax machine box or fax paper box. And so there you go. But it's also a great image. So we talk a lot about quarantine on this show. We talk about quarantine when we do crypto. We talk about quarantine when you bring a new animal in. We talked about quarantine when it came to the new serpentiviruses that are impacting colubrids. If you are a frequent listener to our show and you don't do quarantine, I think we're at a point where we can literally say shame on you. Shame. Do the freaking quarantine, okay? But when you do the quarantine, you need to do the quarantine in an environment where if the snake has mites and you treat it for mites, those mites are going to fall off into the environment and you're going to be able to see them. Because keep in mind, you have those dudonymphs running all over your snake. Those are barely visible. So you're at the beginning of the mite infestation. You may not see those. You might miss them. And there might be hundreds of them on your animal. So if you have them on white paper, any kind of paper, it's just going to make seeing the animals a little bit better. Also, when it comes to hides, you may not want to use a professional plastic hide. You might want to have a box that you could just chuck away, if at least for like the first part of your quarantine. And so a simple quarantine setup works. There are absolutely snakes that you can't do this. If you put some of the South American colubroids that I work with in this for quarantine, you're going to have a dead snake because they're going to be so stressed out. But in that case, you've got to kind of manipulate the environment. But the other thing is 60-day quarantine. You have to do that 60-day quarantine. If you treat for mites, and you treat for mites the way we're talking about, this new snake, you're going to kill the mites, and you're going to make sure they're dead, not just dead, double dead, because you're going to go multiple generations of mites before the animal is even remotely at a point where it can enter your collection. So quarantine is super important. And conveniently, a 60-day quarantine is one or two multi-generations of mites. So it works out really well. So that's the thing. When it comes to your bedding, use the simple bedding. And once you get your snakes out of here, okay, don't just be like, I'm done with quarantine. I'm assuming that we all do this, but I'm also a professor, and I know when I assume, I learn people don't. So make sure when you're done with the quarantine that the quarantine vessel then undergoes essentially a small nuclear event to kill any pathogen or organism or ectoparasite that's left behind from the resident that was in that particular tub, vivarium, whatever. When it comes to decontaminating the mites, there are some ways that work out well. I talk a lot about if you have a polar vortex, use it. Freezing kills most mites. It doesn't kill all mites. There have been some studies where snakes or material that live mites were put into a freezer. If they were frozen for up to 2 to 3 days, it didn't kill all of them, especially the eggs. But if they stay frozen for a while, now listen to the words I'm saying, it's probably going to kill the mites. A lot of people don't like probably. What does kill the mites 100% is heat. They cannot survive heat. If you are getting them to above 250 degrees for more than 20 seconds, you have a dead mite, you have a dead egg. So there's a couple ways to go about doing that. Steamers, if you just basically steam the hell out of the vessel, and I'm not talking about like you steam it for a minute. I'm talking about you leave the steam in a given area for 20 seconds and slowly move around. That's going to wipe out everything. You can also bake the material. Now, I know there's people saying, but Zac, you put a plastic bin in the oven, you're going to melt it and give everyone in your house cancer. We don't want to give everybody cancer. So one way that you can heat that thing up is if it's a small quarantine tub like this, is you can put it in a black bag, throw a Govee in it so you know you get up to temperature, tie that thing off and put it out in the sun all day. You would be amazed at how hot you can get something inside a black trash bag. I know that we have up at school, we did this way back when we first started. We were getting up above 210 degrees on a really, really hot day. So that's some other ways that you can kill it. And then the final way is submerging. So one thing about snake mites is that they do not survive water. Everything that I found about them showed that in the presence of water, they die. We know this. That's why our snakes soak. But I have taken things in the past that had snake mites on them, filled up a big, in my case, it's 100-gallon cattle trough thing at the house here, and just thrown it in there and let it sit at the bottom of it for a week. And that's going to pretty much kill anything that was on it. If you add a little bit of Dawn to that, that breaks the surface tension. And that way, if the mite is able to like get back to the surface, they can actually use hydrostatic and electrical charges to be on the surface tension. Dawn gets rid of the surface tension. So they're just going to sink. And that's another way to kill them. So if we use quarantine effectively, we use some of the treatments we're about to talk about during quarantine, you should, in theory, be able to catch the mites before they can get into your collection. So yet another reason why quarantine really, truly matters.
And it's much easier to treat one snake than it is dozens or hundreds. So
yeah, you don't want to do that.
Reason it's that important.
Yeah. Okay. So the next question, does your snake have mites? Now, a lot of people watching this be like, I know how to tell. But, if we're really going to do a deep dive, because there's people watching this that might be like, I have mites for the first time. Where do we look for mites? So this is an image from a really nice publication. And they conveniently used a lot of snakes with the white parts of their bodies or morphs that are white because the black mites pop. And we do have a colubrid, I believe, down here on figure D in this.
It's like an albino cow king, I believe.
Yep. So the kind of classic area is the head. Investigate the head. snake heads are one of the very few parts of their body that have nooks and crannies. Around the eyeballs, if you look at the inset picture, that makes my skin crawl, but you can kind of see we have a ball python here, and it's got several engorged adult mites in this interorbital space around the eye. That is infested oftentimes with snakes that have mites. So just seeing the snake mites tells you they have mites, but a change in behavior is going to definitely let you know we have a mite problem. So the biggie we all know is soaking. If suddenly your snake that doesn't like water is hanging out in water, we probably have an issue. So that's a behavioral cue. And the reason why is the snake goes to the water probably aids in kind of the irritation a little bit. I read some stuff that theorized that. But also they get into the water, the mites start dying. They're not going to have as many bites. And like we already talked about, water kills the mites. So if you see a snake suddenly soaking in water, note that. Now, that being said, there are individual snakes will soak more than other members of their species. Right over here, I have a boa sigma, and it's from the desert. And every time its water bowl is filled, it is in it. And every single time I look at that damn snake, about a day after the water bowl, I'm convinced it has mites. I get it out. It never has mites. It just really likes to soak. False water cobras soak all the time.
Yeah.
I don't, look at that and think mites. But you got a corn snake doing that, a king, Asian rat snake that don't really do that as a typical part of their behavioral regime. That's probably telling you mites. You can also look in the environment. So
I'll say that's as far as soaking, you're absolutely right. There's going to be certain animals and certain species that do it regularly. Prasinums, green bush rats, or whatever the taxonomy is now, they soak a lot. I mean, for some reason, I don't know why. But usually soaking is a sign of something wrong if they're doing it a lot. If they're not in shed and it's not a species or a unique individual that does this regularly, then it's typically going to tell you they either have mites or they're too hot. So those are things to keep in mind. If you do see an animal soaking regularly that isn't normal, it's telling you something. That behavior is telling you something.
Yeah. Another thing that I see now is when the population gets to a certain level, you'll start to see, especially if you have those reptile basic hides that are black, which I have over 100 of them in this house right now. When the mites are crawling across that and they are defecating, some of them are laying eggs, you'll start to get what looks like a white dust on top of anything that is black. That is actually anymore what tells me, oh crap, we've got mites. And Kinsey, another one of the keepers, actually the curator up at school, one of them, she came to me and said, I'm starting to realize that when we have a little mite outbreak, I see this white dust everywhere. I was like, oh, cool. So I'm assuming it's the feces. It could be something else. It could be the exuvia from all the molting that's going on with all the different stages of life cycle. But I definitely have noticed that the last little outbreak I had here, I saw the dust before I saw anything because the bull snake that had them wasn't soaking at all. So that's something that you can look at. And then a lot of mites will climb, especially after a blood meal. So if you pull the tub or you got the Viv, take a white paper towel and just kind of wipe the top edges. And in rack systems, wipe the top of the cage wipe the top of the slot because they can oftentimes get up on the top there. And so these are all ways to determine my snake has mites. Now, once we determine the snake has mites, we got to do something about it. And so now we're getting into treatment. But before we get to that,
a couple other things. Just, I guess, just little pieces of advice. Whenever I'm looking for mites on an animal, obviously I try to look at the areas on the animal that they would be the most visible and would make the most sense. Like you said, the head, typically the head area, or that upward part of the snake. But the lightest marks, so like on a yellow spot, on a white spot, on whatever. I look at the water bowl, even if the snake's not in it, because they will, if they've got enough of them on them and they did soak, they'll go there. But also for some reason, the mites sometimes travel to the water bowls and they go up to where some of the crevices are around the lip. So if you look around those edges, you may find them. I also, as funny as it sounds, when you're looking for mites on a snake, rather than picking up the snake and moving it around, which you can do that, I actually just stop and sit still and stare at it. Yeah. Because if you're moving your eyes side to side and all this, these little things, I mean, it's real easy to miss. But if you sit still and you just stare at it for a second, I'm looking for movement is what I'm looking for. I'm not scanning for a dark speck, because those, if they're wedged under a scale, it can be real hard to see. But I'm looking to see if something, is there a piece of dirt that moves? Yes. That's what that's another way. And again, it starts, you kind of train your eye for it. That's what happens, eventually. But that's kind of one of my methods, is just sit still and look for something that's not sitting still.
We used to talk a lot about nuance. If you're in your room and you're with your animals all the time, those subtle little cues, you just kind of pick up immediately. Mm-hmm. This one's not acting like itself. Like there's just something off. I found them that way. Another thing that I will do is, if I suspect mites, but they're not, I did everything you said, I don't see mites, I will flag the tub. I have on my gloves. I take off my gloves. I put on new gloves. And then I will usually do a mental check. Like, is it even worth going through the collection anymore? Because I don't want to be the vector. You know what I mean? Most of the time, I then quit what I'm doing. I'll get a pair of gloves that are not black. I bought black gloves once, and I'm never doing it again because I can't see the damn mites as well. So I have light blue gloves, and I have gloves I buy at Menards that are green. And then I will pick the snake up and just basically kind of loosely grab it and wring my hand down and look at my hand. And that time, that works almost all the damn time. You got them, and then boom, we're going to go into treatment now. Like that's the next step. So
the other thing we didn't mention is on light colored or white snakes, where if they are being bit significantly, they can turn a pink coloration. Can you kind of go into that and explain what's happening there?
It's basically an inflammatory response. If when the mite density gets to a certain point, and the mites are all in a given area because it's the right kind of skin for them to get a blood meal, they're all taking, they're all biting. That's a foreign body going into the snake in the form of the chelicerae and the enzymes and all the bits and pieces of the process. And so then you just basically get, it's no different than getting a mosquito bite in a human. You're going to get a bump. You're going to get redness. It's going to become inflamed. And that's what ends up happening with the snakes. And, I have seen a handful of times 50 to 100,000 mites on a snake at one. I mean, it's like horrific. And one of those was a ball python that was a pied. And it was crazy looking at that snake after we got it, under control, because it just turned pink. It was not white. It was pink and I felt awful for the poor thing because it was just in a complete state of inflammation. So,
and understand there are other issues that can cause the snake to turn pink like that.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But this is just another one of those signs. Yes. Mites can be, what's causing that if you happen to see it.
Yep. All right. So, yay. We have these little heathens in the collection. Snakes are there. What do we do?
Congratulations. You have mites. Let's show you what you do.
Congratulations. You win. So we're looking in and we see our corn snake completely underwater like this one. That's not something a corn snake keeper really wants to see. The first thing that I'm doing is I am going to get out of the room and gather my thoughts. I am a huge proponent of think, don't react. Calm heads prevail. have a protocol, have a standard operating procedure for your collection as to what you do. We're going to make suggestions, but it's up to you to determine what you're ultimately going to do. So I can kind of talk about what I do as a private keeper, and Clint can talk about what they do at Metazotics. So what I do is I immediately stop what I'm doing. And I have learned the hard way that I am dealing with this today. I am not going to push it. I'm not doing it tomorrow. I just find time. There have been times where I had the podcast, found the mites right before the podcast, went to like 10 o'clock like we do because I'm on the Eastern Coast, and then went out to the garage, dealt with the mites, because you are fighting a clock, which is that life cycle, and you want to knock them back when you can. So what my process is the snake is going to spend a day in about 1.5 inches of water. I have Rubbermaid tubs. I put the snake in there. And this is before I'm putting any chemicals on it, because I just want to kill the damn mites and get as many of them off of it before we have to introduce chemicals. I usually put a very small amount of Dawn dishwasher detergent to break the surface tension, because they will fall off the snake and float, and then they float till they get to the plastic, and then they crawl up, and we still have a live mite, and the little bastards can lay eggs, and now we got the freaking life cycle. So I do that. And then after, when they go into the water, if they're bad, if I'm seeing a bunch of blooded, gorged adults, I'll go one step further. I'll take them out on my driveway, and I will spray with a hose just to kind of knock them off. I'll kind of hit them here. They don't really like it, but I'm trying to get as many of these things off of as possible. I'm also doing that not into the driveway proper. I actually do it over a garbage can because I want to kill them. I don't want to introduce them to the environment. So I'm doing that. And then so that's what's happening to the snake. And then the next thing, once the snake's dealt with, is the tub. I don't really ever seem to get them in the vivariums. I always seem to get them in the racks. And so the rack tub is coming out. It basically, the substrate gets dumped in a garbage bag, tied off. And then what I do a lot of is I then fill the rack tub up with water and let that sit for a day, because if there's eggs, if there's the larvae, if there's those life stages that are in the environment, they're going to come out into the garbage bag. Anything left behind is going to soak and die. And I usually try to make it so I have soap suds, a bunch of soapy bubbles kind of spilling over the edge onto the top rim of the tub. And then that's going to sit there for a day, 2 days. Sometimes it sits like that for the whole freaking week until the weekend when I can actually work with it. The third thing I do with a rack is I have a squeegee thing, like the same thing you use to clean your window. I will put hydrogen peroxide spray on that, and then I just basically clean the top and the sides, and I squeegee all that crap off. And there's been a couple times where I didn't have that many mites that I could see in the substrate or on the snake, but I did this whole process, and then I take the paper towel and they're all over the top. It was it was a little bit upsetting. And so ever since that one time, that's my process. It takes me, with a CB70 tub, probably 20 minutes to do the whole thing. And then I quit, because if you're absent-minded like yours truly, you think, I'm going to do that tomorrow, and then you forget. And, I don't get to see these animals every single day. And then you remember 2 or 3 days later, and by then we got a real problem. And I'm not using chemicals yet. I'm just relying on water, Dawn dish detergent, and physically removing, getting the animal out. And then the next thing I do is I go get a shower. I then take another shower when I wake up. And that's when I go and look and see how extensive the mites are. Because one time I did all that, and then I was like, well, let's just see where they're at. And I know for a fact I was the vector. That then, because every tub I checked didn't have mites. And then a week later, all of them had mites. And I was like, okay, well, we're not going to like spread these things again this way. So live and learn kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then another fun fact I haven't gotten to tell you all yet. So I'm just going to throw this out there. They bite people. I learned that.
I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. There's been a couple times. One was that the worst mite infestation I've ever seen was at school. And there was a python that got them really, really bad. And I just felt this really weird, itchy sensation. And I just kind of put it up to like you're psyching yourself out. Now I'm fairly certain, just given the sheer volume of mites, that I was getting bitten. Now, I don't know if you can feel it or not, but I definitely read that they can bite you. So there you go.
All right.
All right. What do you do, Clint?
So I actually take kind of a pretty different approach. So first off, we typically, when we're dealing with mites, it's expected. And I say that because it's the quarantine areas where we're, because everything that comes in, we're treating it as if it has mites. And we've been lucky in the sense of, there's definitely been animals we've brought in that have mites. I mean, it's, at any given point, there could be some in quarantine that, brought in with it. But we really haven't had any that have come in where we're like, holy, how did you not see this, right? So it's on. Typically, if we're seeing it, we see one. And you know what I mean? So we're lucky. And again, knock on wood, doesn't mean it's always been like that. There's been times in my life where it's like, how did it get in here? And you have to treat the entire room. But so far, that's kind of how it's happened here, with the exception of the boas, because boas are. You and I talked about that. We did have an incident with boas previously, but we've since got that knocked out. And so what we do is just like you were mentioning, we put everything's on paper in quarantine. It's going to be on paper towels or newspaper, depending on the size of the animal. The paper is going to be treated. We'll talk about the chemicals here in a little bit and what that looks like. If we, in the rare instance where we see a snake has multiple mites on it, or if I see them wedged, under scales or something, we will give them a good wipe down. And I use, there's, again, different products that we can use depending on the species. Again, something else we'll talk about, but Gerasimite is one that I'll use because it's one that is supposed to be safe, that you can put directly on the animal, and we'll wipe that animal down, a little bit. And I look at that more of, that's not going to solve our problem, but it will give the animals some immediate relief. Is to try to, it's like your manual removal, the same steps you're doing. It's really, we're trying to solve that same problem, just reduce the stress of the animal, especially being what we're about to put it through, with the chemicals. So, if it's, as far as quarantine, same thing where once an animal is through quarantine, that tub gets blasted. I mean, because we're treating it as if that tub had crypto in it. Yeah. So it's going to get, because we're cleaning with, was like 12% or 16% peroxide. I forget what that, solution is.
12%.
Yeah. So, we're hitting it with that. It's getting, heat treated depending on size and what we can do. So, it's really getting a lot of the same kind of attention, let's put it that way, that you're giving it. Spraying out because some of these chemicals that you can't spray directly into the environment of the animal, well, like the racks, when the animal's no longer there, we, right inside that slot to try to blast out anything that may be in there. But hopefully by the time something is clear in quarantine, there's nothing left in that slot, either. Yes. With what we've done, and again, we'll talk about the multiple steps with those chemicals here in a moment. But again, really we're attacking it in the same manner, but just with different methods, I guess, is what you're stating right there. It's the treatments on how we approach that is where really, I think we're getting the meat, of what we're doing, because I think, and I guess one of the pieces we probably want to put out there is, if you're only treating the animal, you're going to continue having this battle. It's, one piece I will mention, and we were already doing this, but I believe Josh Alder, when he was on, is when he said it, and I'm like, yeah, duh. And you mentioned it, where they leave the host to lay their eggs.
Yes.
So we are doing regular paper changes, whether they have soiled the paper or not, wiping that tub out and everything, because I view it as, while we're not going to get everything, I know we have to be discarding a certain number of eggs in that process. So it's one more step in fighting this battle, and trying to win it. So that's another piece during that I really want to, point out, I guess.
Okay. So we have mice. Now we're going to get into some chemicals. Now, we're going to first talk about these, but there's definitely the right ways to use these and the wrong ways to use these. Okay. No pest strips. That is a standard chemical that we use to kill off mites. I can tell you, I hate them. I don't know what it is about the smell. They've always made me sick to my stomach whenever I smelled them. They're not my favorite thing. And then we have pyrethrin, permethrin, not exactly the same thing, but similar to each other. With all of these, you have to know what you're doing. And after my talk with Dr. Booth today, even more so, you have to know what you're doing. So just because I've got that picture of permethrin up there that says rapid kill, that doesn't mean that that's the kind we're going to use. And we'll get Dr. Whitman to say whether that's a good thing or not. But I had to find a picture for permethrin, so that's why we have that up there. So I want to go into how these work. A lot of people know this is what I use, put it in the environment, kills the mites. I want our people to understand how it actually kills them. Because the other thing is, this stuff's in the environment with the snakes. Be it if it's in, you might have it in the enclosure. Hopefully the snake's not in the enclosure. But you might have it in the room and not realize that the proximity of that cage to another cage might, through the process that undergoes chemically, hurt your snake. So you got to make sure that this is all being taken into consideration. In particular, hognose snakes. Hognose snakes are insanely susceptible to chemicals. They don't handle chemicals well. And you can definitely, with the best of intentions, kill a lot of hognose snakes by exposing them to things like no pest strips at certain high concentrations, or not using permethrin correctly will definitely kill a hognose snake very effectively. Other snakes seem to be more bulletproof, but let's kind of know how this works. So we're going to go back to biology class. And what we're looking at here is basically the neuromuscular junction. This is how neurons communicate with muscles. We're going to pretend like this is how it works in an insect. My arthropod friends, I know that this is not exactly correct, but it turns out there's not very many good visuals at a lower, less than PhD level for how neurons work in bugs. So that's why I have this image. So the way that no pest strips work is they are what we call an organophosphate insecticide. And so the way that neurons kind of communicate is you have acetylcholine that kind of comes into this synaptic cleft, okay? And that's a neurotransmitter. That's basically a chemical that tells nerves, communicates to nerves what's going on in the environment. And it's also needed for nerves to talk to nerves, or nerves to talk to other cells. And so what happens is the acetylcholine kind of comes in and it's used up, but it's kind of sitting there after it's used up. So we've got to get rid of the acetylcholine. So that's where we're going to have an enzyme, because enzymes break down chemicals, biomolecules. And so the enzyme that gets rid of acetylcholine is called acetylcholine esterase. And so acetylcholine esterase comes into that cleft, digests the acetylcholine, that acetylcholine molecule gets out of there, and then another acetylcholine, new one, kind of comes into play. And so this kind of reaction where you have acetylcholine come up, it transmits whatever the nerve needs. Acetylcholine esterase comes in, gets rid of that acetylcholine molecule. A new one comes in. That's needed for this process for our nerves to work. And basically what no pest strips do as organophosphate insecticides is they block acetylcholine esterase. So you don't have the enzyme. And so what happens is acetylcholine comes in, and then another acetylcholine comes in, and then another acetylcholine comes in, and it's not communicating with the nerve. And the nerve then proceeds to freak the hell out. And so what ends up happening with an organophosphate insecticide is that freak out phase, the arthropod starts basically having a period of hyperactivity. It's moving all over the place. And then immediately after that, because the acetylcholine's not getting out of there, the neuron doesn't know what to do. For the purpose of our podcast tonight, not entirely true. The neuron goes, forget this, and shuts down. And when it shuts down and a neuron stops working, that's what we call paralysis. And so what you end up having is the bug initially is doing this, moving around frantically as this acetylcholine esterase, acetylcholine reaction is not going down. And then ultimately that stops, and then boom, it's paralyzed. And when it's paralyzed, can't breathe effectively, and then it dies. And so that's how this works. Now, I'm telling you this because I want us all to remember that our snakes have this too.
I was going to say, that's what these symptoms look like right here to me, is over-treatment.
We throw the no pest strip in with the snake in its entirety. It's not good, guys. Don't do that. So what you should probably do is yank the snake out, treat it in a different space, and then make sure you are using your no pest strip appropriately. Because if you don't use it appropriately, if you just tickle the mites, you don't kill the mites, you're setting yourself up for resistance. And we'll talk about that here in a second. The other type of chemical that we use a lot are pyrethrins, permethrins, things of that nature. This is a contact poison. So the other one, let me back up, organophosphate, that kind of orangish yellow in the middle of the no pest strip plastic. Let me back up one more. You can see it. This is a frame you can use to hold it. But what happens is that organophosphate is going to off-gas into the environment continually over time. And it's going to create a little cloud of organophosphate all around the bottom part of the enclosure. Sometimes it can kind of go up. And that's how it's killing the bug. In the case of permethrin, this is the treatment where you kind of infamously put it on your paper, like Prevenamite, put it on your paper, let it dry, and then you put that dry piece into the enclosure. As the mites are walking around, they make contact with the dried permethrin. They then absorb it into their bodies, and this is a very different poison. So what this does is it opens these things called sodium channels that are in nerves. Sodium channels are in muscles too. What you get, you can kind of see the voltage gated calcium channel there. Sodium kind of works the same way. What normally happens is the channels open up, sodium's absorbed, and then the channel doesn't necessarily close, but another sodium molecule is going to be absorbed up into that after we use that initial sodium molecule, okay? With this, you just basically take your sodium channel and you open it as wide as it can be, and all the sodium goes in. You don't want that to happen. This is a very choreographed reaction. When it floods with sodium, you see the exact same thing you see with the no pest strips. The neuron doesn't know what to do. You get the period of hyperactivity, and then immediately after that, too much sodium is going to lead to paralysis. The neuron can't work now, and then the ultimate result of that is death. And so we have two different modes of action that are working on similar physiological aspects of the bug, which is kind of interesting. This is when we get into resistance. So resistance is essentially evolution. I think it's safe to say CCR, we promote evolution. We know it's a thing. And this is actually evolution in a tub or a viv. So what happens is if you don't use your insecticides the right way, you are essentially tickling them with these chemicals. If you don't get your dosage right, where you're killing them, you're at what we call a sublethal dose. How do you get it a sublethal dose? You don't read the no pest strip, instructions, and you don't use enough. okay, in your enclosure. That's how you can get to a sublethal dose. You don't dose your permethrin right when you put it on your paper and let it dry. You only put permethrin on part of the paper, not all of the paper. You're basically creating a gradient inside your enclosure where there's a lethal area, but then there's an area where they're going to get exposed, but they're not going to get killed. My conversation with Dr. Booth, thank you, Dr. Booth, thank you, Warren, is basically he just stressed this over and over and over again. Protocol, 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 and we must avoid sublethal exposure. So when we go and use these chemicals, use them for the full duration. Don't put the no pest strip in there and then be like, oh, all the mites are dead. Well, it said to put it in there for like a week, 10 days. It's only been 3 days. I'm going to yank that out and I'm going to put the snake back in. Go the whole time so you get a complete kill. Because this is what happens if you don't. These little mites are incredible creatures. Most arthropods are when it comes to this. When you expose them to the chemicals, they have built into their genome, built into their genes to deal with environmental stressors. And when you expose the mites to this and it doesn't kill them, many mites have the ability to do something that we call upregulate genes that are not turned on. When we say upregulate in biology, we simply mean we're flipping the switch, and now this gene that's inactive is now activated. And when it's activated, what's crazy is the mites are then able to not only take that upregulated gene and defend themselves, they can pass it on to future offspring. There's something called epigenetics. This is not exactly that, but it just reminds me of that. That's when your environment is dictating your genetic response, which we were all taught in biology in high school doesn't happen. But now there's a lot more evidence that something like this actually goes down. And so what you end up having happen is two things happen with the mites. When you do sublethal exposure, we get a gene that's upregulated, that's turned on, and then basically it starts to make it so that their cuticle thickness increases. It's called cuticular thickness increase. Basically, we get an exoskeleton morphology shift. Why is that important? Well, that's important because if you think about how pyrethrins work, it's contact toxin. So if their exoskeleton gets thicker, that just means that that toxin has to go through more mite to get to the inside. We don't want to see that happening in response to exposure. The other thing is, and this is even crazier, is they basically are able to create their own metabolites that can then go after those organic phosphates and kind of like enzymes and start breaking them down inside their body before they can kill them, before they can get to the acetylcholinesterase and the acetylcholine and that whole interaction happens. And so what you end up getting is something called metabolic detoxification. And in essence, you have a thicker exoskeleton that's going to, aid make them resistant to contact poisons. You have a metabolic detoxification that's going to make it so that the things they're breathing in aren't going to kill them. And this is all happening because you didn't kill them. You used a sublethal exposure. How do you use sublethal exposure? A lot of keepers will think, I'm doing my due diligence. I'm going to have no pest strips set up all over the room. If you've got them set up all over the room, you're tickling all of your arthropods. Some of your arthropods are dying, but some of your arthropods are undergoing this process. And what you're building are resistant mites in your room. And then if we're going to add a little bit more biology to this, your room is an island. And in theory, all of your mites and arthropods and pathogenic organisms, they're all going to evolve to what equates to fitness in that space. So what we do not want to do is have no pest strips up everywhere. We don't want that. And what
this
we
was
also
a mistake.
want to,
I was going to say, this was a mistake we made. This was something I learned in the process because in our nursery, we would put pieces around throughout just in case. So, my mindset was in the event something gets through quarantine and makes its way in here, this should help us, negate that problem. And it wasn't until, as I said at the very beginning of this episode, you and I both learned quite a bit, in this. This is one of the things that immediately told Kaylee today, go take all those pet strips out. All those little pieces that are in the nursery, get rid of them. It's because, it makes complete sense. It makes complete sense,
Yeah.
What you're saying. One thing I kind of want to say that I hope everyone's taken away from what you're saying right now. There's this sweet spot, and that's where Dr. Whitman's going to come in just a moment, is to discuss those sweet spots. But we're always afraid we're going to do too much and kill the snake, and we absolutely can. All the symptoms that you were talking about in the process of how the mite dies, you see those in your snake if you go too heavy, if you go too much. The very first time I ever treated for mites, I think I was 18, 19 years old. And I didn't even know they existed really until, that point. And I remember the mistake I made. I got, it was not Prevenamite, but let's just say generic, off brand of that. And instead of spraying the paper towels and everything and putting them in there, I sprayed the tubs, threw the animals back in, closed them, came back the next morning. Half a rack of these baby snakes were dead, and the other half were twitching and jerking, and you know what I mean? All these erratic behaviors and movements. And it was a hard lesson learned on, what. Yes. Now, didn't really have internet to go through and check all this up. I was just going through, kind of how it was described to me, but that absolutely can happen. And I do want to mention, I don't know what the long-term effects are. That'll be a question for Dr. Whitman. But I will say, in the event you're using one of these and you see the beginning signs of that behavior in a snake, I've seen that happen, where then if you can remove that snake from that environment and get it, fresh air completely in a fresh environment, I've seen them bounce back. But of course, it's going to have that where it's too far. Now, again, long-term effects, I can't speak to that. So I guess in short, what I want to make sure we understand is you can do too much and have very detrimental results to your animal. But now what we're hearing is doing too little is going to have extreme detrimental results in your long-term fight against these animals. Yes. Because it's, basically you didn't hit it with enough gamma rays to kill it. So now you've created a Hulk, and that's now what you're going to have to fight afterwards. So
we don't want to fight the Hulk. No. And the other thing that Dr. Booth said, which is very important, is to not rely on a single pesticide to treat your environment. So, use no pest strips to their full effect, and then use permethrin to its full effect, then use no pest strips to its full effect, because you might begin to get some resistance to the no pest strips, but then you bring the permethrin in, and just because you're resistant to no pest strips does not mean you're resistant to permethrin. And so then that's going to knock out, those animals. But then you add the permethrin, which uses the sodium channel piece. We add the no pest strip. Now you're using organophosphate, which is the acetylcholinesterase. You're just kind of hitting them with multiple ways to kill them, which is another really effective way to wipe them out. But if you use the no pest strip sublethally, and then you use the permethrin sublethally, you are now creating a horrible Frankenstein monster that nobody wants to deal with. So please make sure you understand how you are using your pesticides. Okay. And thank you, Dr. Booth. Finally, we're getting near the end. So here's what I just said. And then talking to Dr. Booth, if you made it to this point, he wants your mites. Now, I'm not saying to put a snake loaded with mites and send it to Booth. He would kill Clint and I if you did that. What he wants, though, are the actual mite bodies. You can get those by taking, this is what I've done to send him samples. Take that water bowl, pour it in a coffee filter. The water's going to go through. The mites are going to be left on the coffee filter. Take that coffee filter, fold it up, put it in a baggie, just like we send our sheds out. Put that in the freezer, and then overnight it to him. And he's actually said that he wants to investigate this and help us all out. So he can look at the genes and see this resistance in real time, which is kind of a crazy thing, just to get an idea what the background resistant rate is. Okay, final thing before we get to drugs is just a couple alternative methods. An old school method. This is what I used the first time that I ran into snake mites. It was horrible. I still to this day remember the amount of vegetable oil that ended up all over my bedroom in my mother's house because the damn garter snake got out while I was doing this and just spread it everywhere. There was this idea that you basically are smothering the mites. You get vegetable oil, you lather it on there. Obviously, it's not going to hurt them. I can tell you the snakes hate it. They did not like it. The very first time I had snake mites ever, it was the summer of 97 or 98. This is what I used. The snake mites died, may or may not have been because of the vegetable oil, but that's a strategy. And then if you have a bioactive enclosure, you're going to have a problem because you're not going to want to put a no pest strip or permethrin in there because your springtails and isopods are going to die. You may want to seriously consider mite treatment because I don't know if you can effectively do it. But I do know Nipper, one of our friends from across the pond, I've heard him talk about using this. Stratiolaps semitis. Semitis is Latin for scimitar, which is like a blade. These are predatory mites. There are actually mites that specialize on eating other mites. I know people have used this. They swear by it. It works. So we'll talk about that. You can buy these online. They can be sent to you. I tried to get them for a couple bioactive tanks that I had here. The only problem that I had is every single time I've ordered them, every single one of them was dead when I got them. That doesn't mean it happens for everyone. But these mites, there's been some papers that have come out of Europe where they've, quite literally taken Ophiuchnisis, put it in, Petri dishes, introduced these guys, and these guys ate every single one of them in a matter of hours. So they are honed in on the chemical cues of Ophiuchnisis. They will go and eat them. These are some alternative methods if you don't want to be using chemicals. Okay. And that is it for our PowerPoint tonight. I'm going to get rid of this, and we're going to bring Dr. Whitman to the stage. Okay. Oh, here we go. Well, according to Max, be careful as legality varies heavily from place to place regarding predatory mites. So there we go. Maybe not do that. Okay. All right. So I'm going to remove this. And yay! CCR President Vet, the one and only Dr. Zac Whitman is with us today. How are you doing, Dr. Whitman?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries.
Thanks for sticking with us.
Yes.
As long as this episode is. So
this is a long one.
Appreciate your time.
Mm-hmm.
I'll stick around till the end of all of them.
All right. Excellent. So there were 3 drugs that we wanted to talk about tonight. We wanted to talk about ivermectin, which is a drug that's been used historically to treat mites. We wanted to talk about frontline spray, a topical that has been used and is very difficult to get now. And then move on to the new class of drugs, which most people know as the brand name NexGard, which is kind of this new way of treating mites. So if you don't mind, I'd just like to talk about ivermectin as a drug, like how it works and your thoughts as a veterinarian as to whether we should be using it to treat mites or not. So I'll just turn it over to you.
Well, to just go back a slight step,
fine.
I think that when I went back to read up on some mite things, and I turned to the very first page of one of my parasite books, there's a quote from Doug Mader, who's kind of one of the godfathers of reptile medicine. And like the first line in the chapter on external parasites is a Doug Mader quote saying that there is no such thing as a mite treatment that is 100% safe and 100% effective. All of these things are a little bit of the dose makes the poison, and too little and it's not effective, and too much and you can see side effects in your animals. There's also a lot of variability in how people dose these things and how people use these things, and a lot of variability in how different species respond to things. And a lot of times we're working with people who have experience with relatively small sample sizes. Yes. Certainly there are people who have huge snake collections and who are running pet stores and who are dealing with mites all the time, but the vast majority of people who are commenting on Facebook about work for them have treated mites 1, 2, 5 times in the course of their entire life. So there's a lot of people who swear by one particular thing. I've always used the no pest strips and it's always been fine, and I've never had a snake die, and I'm gonna die on that hill. And there's other people who have used ivermectin a ton, and there's other people who have used frontline a ton, And all of these things can work. We wouldn't be talking about them if they were completely ineffective options. And all of them can have some significant side effects if you're not careful with them. And with these new drugs, we might be in a place where maybe Doug Mader's original quote is not quite so accurate anymore. But yeah, we can definitely talk more about that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've definitely seen snakes injured by water. I've seen snakes injured by no pest strips. I've seen snakes injured by prevenamite. I've seen snakes injured by ivermectin. I haven't personally used Frontline a ton, so I haven't seen snakes injured by it, but they definitely can be.
Yeah.
So in terms of that's just kind of the baseline across the board until we get to these new drugs, which are called the isoxazolines, is the kind of group of chemicals that these newer drugs are. But in terms of ivermectin, it works very similarly to the pyrethroid. So the mechanism of action is very similar to what you were already talking about. In fact, almost all insecticides that we're talking about kind of take advantage of a few differences between insect nervous systems and vertebrate nervous systems. So almost all of these drugs work in subtle changes of the exact same mechanisms. The only two things we're really talking about here are drugs that affect the GABA channels, the sodium and chloride channels, and organophosphates that affect acetylcholine. So we don't really need to get into the actual mechanism. More, it's about how you have to apply it, how you get the dose that you need, where you want it, when you want it, for how long you want it to be there, and a little bit of resistance issues, a little bit of cost issues. All of those kind of factors play into what makes the most sense, what drug makes the most sense to use. It's an entirely different situation to try and kill mites in a household with one snake than it is for a pet store or a breeder who's going to a show every weekend. Those are just totally different worlds. So ivermectin, traditionally, the way that a lot of people have used it is as a topical spray that can be put on both the animal directly and it can be put in the environment. It has a pretty good margin of safety. Ivermectin can be used orally, it can be used injectably, it can be used topically, and it can be used in the environment. So it's one that can be used in almost any way you could think of using it, which is a big advantage. And I would often start out, if I had an animal in the office, with an injection or an oral dose for the actual snake, and then go home with a spray for the environment. One of the issues with ivermectin as a spray that I see people misinterpret a lot is that it's not water soluble. And when you mix it in a spray bottle, we'll talk about mixing non-water soluble things more when we're talking about the next card also. But if you put a small amount of ivermectin in a spray bottle, you need to envision your salad and your water and vinegar and your vinegar and oil and your salad dressing and what that looks like, because the chemical is clear, so you can't see that that's happening, but it is. They're not equally distributed, so you really have to shake the bottle excessively while you're spraying it, which spray bottles don't like that. If you're shaking it and spraying it at the same time, you're sucking up air. Like if you're getting a good stream, you're probably not doing it right. You really need to be pretty aggressive in how you're shaking it up, and it's kind of a pain. And you're not 100% confident that every spray you're spraying is actually giving you the amount of ivermectin that you think you're getting in that area. You generally don't want to have uncontrolled dosing of it orally. So most people would remove the water bowl after treating the animal in the environment for a couple days, and then repeat that on some kind of schedule, maybe every 5 to 7 days, repeat dosing the animal and dosing the environment, and then cleaning everything and replacing the water bowl. And like you were saying, the most important thing about the majority of these treatments is going long enough that you're sure you actually got them all, which can be a surprisingly long time.
Yeah.
With the ivermectin, is there, and if it's not a comfortable answer, then that's okay. if someone is going to be utilizing that as a spray, obviously it's hard to get it to mix, and we heard that. What is the ratio? What's the the comfortable range? And obviously, I think it goes. We've got Dr. Whitman. He's a vet, but he's not your vet. So we want to say that to everyone. He's not got your animal in his office. So we're not. No one's being held responsible here. But obviously, people are going to be tuning in, hoping to learn how to attack this. So as close as we can get to telling them how best to utilize it, I would like to.
Yeah. I try and stay away from giving actual drug dosages in this kind of format. It's too easy for people to make mistakes. Ivermectin comes in a lot of different concentrations.
That's true.
You need to be able to know how to do just a little bit of medical math. People assume that bottles are certain sizes. 1 liter bottles are not always 1 liter bottles. There's just a lot of ways for things to get miscommunicated in these kind of formats. When you are not working with drugs on a daily basis, the temptation is just kind of like, well, just like give me this one dose that I'm looking for here. But when you're doing medical math all day, every day, and giving drugs to patients every day, it's only a matter of time before you make a mistake looking at a drug dose, or going back to that talk, or going back to your notes of that guy you saw talking about something. So I'm really careful about going to direct sources when I'm looking up a drug dose, and not going back to that piece of paper that I had in my pocket that I went to a lecture on. Since I don't have an actual veterinary client-patient relationship, I'm going to try and steer away from actual dosage. We can definitely, there's these papers are publicly available. We can talk about the published dosages for
that would be great.
things.
Yeah, just anywhere we can direct people to be able to try to get some information, to help fight what they're going to fight.
For sure. There's a lot of different recommendations out there for the ivermectin. I'm not aware of any actual studies that show an exact concentration that you need to hit for environmental control. There's a bunch of different ranges and recommendations, and if you ask different vets, you'll probably get different answers on the best concentration to use. I
have another question. I know that I can hop in my car and drive to Tractor Supply and buy ivermectin. What are your thoughts on us going there? Now I got ivermectin, I can treat my snakes. Is that that ivermectin for horses and other things that's not exactly the same?
It's the exact same drug.
Or it is the same constituency.
It's the exact same drug for sure. And in some states, it's pretty widely available over the counter. In other states, it's much more tightly regulated. There are livestock formulations of it that are very, very excessively concentrated.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, ivermectin has become a very controversial drug since COVID, when people started trying to use it for all kinds of cancer-related things and antiviral-related things, which there really isn't any evidence to support. But there's a lot of talk about it and a lot of controversy surrounding what it does and doesn't do. And I've actually seen right now my main area of practice is in a dog and cat emergency room, and I've seen quite a few ivermectin overdoses from people trying to treat cancer in their dogs, and miscalculating how much of the horse ivermectin they're trying to use for their toy poodle. And when you're talking about trying to dose horse ivermectin for a baby garter snake, not something that I would recommend.
All right, cool. That's what I was trying to get.
In general, I think this is something that you'll do better if you have supervision from a vet, especially initially. If you're a importer, or you're going to shows every week and you need something that you need to be able to use regularly, and you have a relationship with a vet who you can ask, what kind of dose would you recommend for me to use this product in this way? I don't have any problem with anyone getting it the cheapest way possible and using it in a way that works for them.
Cool. Okay. Can we move on to frontline?
Only one question.
The one thing I would mention about ivermectin is there are definitely some resistance issues. There's definitely some people that have overused it. It's been around a long time, and there are some mites out there that seem like it just doesn't work.
Does let's call it overdosing? utilizing ivermectin too heavy, too high of a dose, does it result in the same symptoms that we mentioned earlier with the other pesticides? The, kind of neurological issues that we see. And then, just looking for, to kind of show our listeners that if you see these symptoms, you've gone too far. Quick backtrack. So, okay.
Yeah, and what you were saying before about being able to save them, it's pretty rare to be able to catch them in time. For most of these chemicals that we're talking about, by the time they show neurologic symptoms, the prognosis is pretty bad. There are some chemicals that are not quite as severe as others. So, for example, one that we haven't talked about yet at all is 7-Dust, which is very similar mechanism of action to the no pest strips, the organophosphate type chemicals. It's in a dust format. You can sprinkle it around the cage corners or sprinkle it in bedding, things like that. That one's not quite as severe if they show neurologic signs from that one. There are some drugs you can use to intervene, and sometimes you can save those animals. I have never seen an animal that was symptomatic from permethrins like Prevenamite or those types of things. I've never seen one recover. I've heard people say that they've seen it, but I've never personally seen that.
Actually,
were they bigger, more robust animals that were showing symptoms?
Typically, you have a better chance at it if it's like even a baby ball python versus a baby colubrid, something with a little more girth to it, a little more size. But I actually have had smaller colubrids bounce back, after. But this was early, it's. Because again, I'd done it before where I saw what happened. So I was watching and checking, and I could tell that's not a normal movement even before it was a severe, twitch. And so it was an immediate get them, out of there, get them clean, get it off their body, get, make sure they weren't breathing any of it at any point. So, but yes, absolutely. The bigger the animal, the greater the chance of it being able to handle it, compared to the small ones.
Yeah. And in terms of frontline, I would say we don't even really need to get that much into it. The mechanism of action is very similar. The application of it is very similar. It's pretty much only a topical. So that was not quite as versatile as the ivermectin. But you run into some of the same issues with it in terms of when you're spraying it, are you really spraying it everywhere? Are you getting every single nook and cranny of the cage? If you're only relying on something like that and you're not using any freezing or heat or anything else like that, you're at the mercy of, did you really get every single inch of every nook and cranny? So that's a weakness for both the ivermectin and the fipronil, the frontline. It's difficult to get in a liquid spray form these days. It used to be a very commonly available thing, but because of resistance in fleas, actually, in dogs and cats, it kind of fell out of favor. It just stopped working. So
that's
they
why
stopped making it as much.
So basically, wasn't killing the fleas, and that's why they backed off.
Started out as being one of the best flea killers out there, and then very quickly, within a very short period of time, became almost completely ineffective.
Is that because people were not using it properly in the sublethal exposure we just talked about? Basically,
yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I have a couple questions though that I've always wondered about. So you spray it on snake. Does the snake absorb it into its body, and then the chelicerae, they slurp it up, or is it the topical, the actual chemical hits the outside of the bug and the mite, and that's what's killing it, or is both?
Probably some of both, and it probably depends on the drug and depends on the species that you're spraying it on. A lot of these drugs are effective as topical drugs that are then absorbed systemically. So, we all know there's plenty of these insecticides that you drip on the back of your dog and cat's neck once a month, and that's absorbed into their bloodstream. There are others where it just spreads out over the oils on their skin, and it's more of a contact thing. I think for ivermectin, it's probably both. They're probably absorbing some of it systemically, and then the insect is taking it with a blood meal. You're also coating the animal in it, so the insects are just being directly exposed to it.
And with the frontline, do you know if it's the organophosphate, like the acetylcholinesterase piece, or if it's
it's the GABA channels.
GABA channels. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, next question. We like frontline at West Liberty. Is there any danger? I distinctly remember spraying this onto snakes thinking has anybody even questioned the concentration coming out of this bottle going onto the snake? Like, is that a vertebrate thing where it works for dogs, it works for cats, it's going to work for the snakes because of that? Or is it like literally like we don't have a freaking clue if this dose straight out of the bottle going onto the snake is actually okay?
Yeah. There's definitely some concern with just how the drug is absorbed. Many of these drugs are very safe if they're fully dry and you're talking about skin contact. The same drug can be very dangerous if you drink it or inhale it or something like that. So when we're talking about spraying it on a snake, is it actually is the danger actually spraying it on the snake? No, probably not. The danger might be from the overspray that the snake inhaled when you did that, or from the snake going through its water bowl a couple hours after you did that and then drinking the water. There are other factors there. The Frontline is the one that I'm probably the least personally familiar with, but I have absolutely seen snakes overdose and die from direct application of Frontline. This is going back a long time, and both of them used it in what I would say are not the most appropriate ways. Neither of them took out the water bowls, and neither of them washed off the snake in any kind of reasonable time afterwards. So, there's, like I said, there's plenty of people who have used Frontline for a very long time and have had no problems. There's plenty of people who've used no pest strips for a long time and had no problems. I've definitely seen all of these things kill snakes.
All right. Well, now we're going to get on to the potential. We said potential golden bullet, which is this new strategy. And there are some papers that have come out of Europe where they've tested it. And then I definitely want you to talk about how we cannot necessarily use the drugs for dogs and cats on our snakes and the reason why. So if you don't mind going over the new kid in town.
Yeah. So in the past decade or so, there's been 3 or 4 different drugs that have come out for dogs primarily, but some of them for cats also, that are really broad spectrum against a huge variety of fleas, ticks, mites, insects, a lot of different things. The class of drugs is called isoxazolines or isoxazolides. And there's 4 main ones that we have available to us in the US. So NexGard, the drug in that is afoxolaner. All these have funny names that end in laner. So afoxolaner is NexGard. Fluorolaner is Brevecto. There's another product that I think actually is going to be one of the biggest ones for us, which is called Exalt. That's a different brand of fluorolaner. There's Sarolaner, which is Simparica, and there's Lodilaner, which is Credelio. So Credelio, Simparica, Brevecto, and NexGard would be the brand names that people might be familiar with from their dog and cat products. Most of these are a once-a-month product in dogs and cats. It's an oral chewable tablet that's made for dogs and cats to eat them voluntarily. So they're, chewable meat flavored kind of tablets. Brevecto, fluorolaner, is the longest lasting one. I think fluorolaner is the one I'm most interested in. Everyone kind of in the reptile community got started off on the NexGard, the afoxolaner route, because that was the very first paper that came out used that drug. Since then, there's been just a couple of papers on fluorolaner. The reason why I'm most interested in fluorolaner is a couple reasons. First of all, it has the longest half-life in dogs and cats. So Brevecto in dogs lasts for 3 months. So 4 doses for a dog keeps them completely protected for an entire year. Whereas NexGard is monthly for dogs. Fluorolaner has also been approved for certain types of mites in chickens, and there is a product called Exalt that is available commercially for chickens. It is a little bit expensive, and it only comes in very large quantities, so it might be getting some of these things in a format that works for you is going to be one of the biggest issues that we'll face, and we'll talk about that. But the fact that an oral liquid already exists in the veterinary world, and that it is safe for both cats and birds and dogs, and that it's the longest acting, to me gives me the most the most hope that Florilaner is probably going to be the one that we're going to see taking off in reptile use most likely and most and soonest.
That form is available here in the States right now.
I'm going to add a comment. So here we go. Bama Reptiles. My shop has used Exalt for the past few months with very good results. So there you go. Very timely.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I will say about this new group of drugs is they've certainly been used in dogs and cats for a little while now. Their use in reptiles is very, very new. You know, we're talking about really the past 4 years that anyone has known anything about this. And right now, personally, at the moment, I have heard nothing but 100% dead mites and no adverse effects on any animals that have been given these drugs. Now, 100% success and 100% safety is not something that's true of any drug on the planet. So I think that should tell you how little we know about these drugs.
Right.
And it's very often that we don't know about some of the dangers of these drugs until we get out into the really big sample sizes, and they've been given to thousands of animals over a long period of time. You know, we didn't mention it when we were talking about ivermectin, but ivermectin is a perfect example of there's certain animals that are much, much more sensitive to that particular drug than other drugs. Indigo snakes, certain species of skinks, hognose snakes. There's a couple species that are much more sensitive. Hognose snakes are particularly sensitive to pyrethrins and to prevenamite and those types of things, to the point where I really don't recommend those products for hognose at all. When I don't have personally a ton of experience with these newer drugs, honestly. Both of my dogs are on Bravecto, by the way. Since COVID, pre-COVID, I practiced a lot on exotics, and post-COVID, I've been working mostly in an emergency room. So the past couple of years that these drugs have been more widely used, I just haven't been seeing the same reptile caseload. So I don't have a ton of personal experience actually using these. When I posted about this just a few days ago on some of the veterinary forums, just looking for any new updates, any weird things that anyone has noticed, I got more of the same things that I've been reading about. 100% success rate, no problems. When I started asking, well, has anyone given it to really young animals? Like, anyone given it to, like, 2-week-old neonates yet? And I got crickets. So I'm waiting for someone to say, oh, I thought it was going to be safe, and I gave it to all 12 of my indigo snakes and they all died, or my chameleons, or my Egernia skinks, or where we're going to find something that there is a toxic dose or toxic species or something like that. Yeah, right now what we are seeing is a single treatment with NexGard or with the Florilaner, the Bravecto, or the Exalt seems to be able to last long enough to knock out the mite's entire life cycle without any environmental treatment. So without breaking down your bioactive enclosure, and without taking apart your racks, and without leaving your rack outside all winter, and without putting all your racks out in garbage cans on the front lawn, and without taking out every single one of your 300 babies and spraying them and emptying the cage. The whole thing has the potential to be a lot more simple with these drugs. And like I said, everything I'm saying, I'm kind of hesitant. I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. I know this sounds too good to be true, and it probably is. But at the moment, this looks like one of the most promising things we've seen. In general, I don't tend to be a super early adopter of a lot of things. If I have something that's working for me, if a brand new antibiotic came out tomorrow, I would not be the first one to go and give it to a dog the next day. I would want a little bit of time and data and information on something that it's actually better than what I'm currently doing or has actual less risk. But this is a situation where all of our current options are not great. None of them work that well, and all of them have very obvious known dangers. So this is one where thankfully I have not had to deal with mites in my own collection in a very long time, and I have a lot of really oddball species But I think if I was dealing with mites, this would probably be my first line go-to, even now with how little is known about it.
So
And
go ahead, Clint, and then I'll go.
right now, we're only able to get our, because basically for the listeners, if they are going to go this route, how do they go this route? Right. So this has to have vet involvement to be able to get a hold of this particular drug in the liquid form, correct?
Yeah. So I think in any form for any of these guys, these should be prescription only products.
I think you can get the next, because chewables you can get a hold of right now.
But we don't want those.
Are chewable is chewable NexGard over the counter? Can you just walk into a Petco and buy NexGard?
Sitting back here. Yeah, you can get a hold of those. So that's why I want to say, to get your hands on the right form, for what we're wanting to utilize it for, we're going to need to get vet involvement to have it prescribed, correct?
Yeah. So the problem is, first of all, we don't know a lot about dosing and what doses we actually need. So we need more information. I'm not going to say that I have the answers for the resistance problem. Drug resistance is something that is a huge problem in human medicine, even when we're being very conscious of it. The truth is that we need to use these medications to treat these bugs. These bugs are trying to find ways to evade our tools.
They don't want to die.
And there is no perfect system. It's not like if we do this right, we'll be able to thread the needle and we're going to have a perfect drug that's going to work forever. There's always going to be that battle between organism and pathogen and treatment. We need to know what kind of dose we're giving, and it's very difficult to know what kind of dose you're giving if you're trying to chop up a meat flavored chewable. Mm-hmm. The drug is not evenly distributed in the pill, and the drug is not water soluble. So you have a protein bound, fat bound drug, and you have a tiny snake, and you're trying to cut up this meat flavored tab into, if you're talking about a 200 gram colubrid, you're talking about an eighth of a tablet or something like that, where maybe that could be reasonable. If you're talking about really small snakes, you're talking about just dividing it up in ways where you're not actually confident that you're getting the drug that you're getting. You might be giving a significant overdose if you give the wrong piece of the tablet. You just don't know. If you try and mix it with water, you run into the same issues like we were talking about with the ivermectin, where it's just not mixing evenly in the water. You don't know that each unit of water has the right amount of drug in it. So there are a couple ways around this. I believe all of these drugs are available as compounded medications. So any veterinarian can call in one of these medications to a compounding pharmacy and have it shipped to your door. And it can be in an oral liquid form that will be the right dose for the weight of your pet. The one that I'm most excited about is the Flurulaner, because there is Exalt out there. As far as I'm aware, Exalt only comes, the smallest bottle it comes in from the manufacturer is a 1 liter bottle. And that bottle is over $1,000. And that one bottle contains, 50,000 doses for most of us using it on normal sized reptiles. So it's an absurd amount. They're using it to dose at chicken farms. And so if you have an exotics animal hospital that sees a lot of reptiles, they might have this on the shelf already, and they might be using it, and they might be able to just prescribe it to you at a relatively reasonable cost. If you're in a rural area and you have poultry vets near you, you might be able to get this drug from them at a reasonable cost, because they don't need to sell you the whole liter bottle. They can divide it up. But I would say compounding and finding vets that are working with Exalt are definitely going to be the best ways for people to get a hold of this at the moment. There are plenty of people who are chopping up NexGard, and so far I've heard nothing but good things from those people. I've heard plenty of people doing it and killing all of their mites and not having any side effects in their snakes. But I just think we don't know enough about how effective it is, whether or not we're creating super bugs. There's just so many unknowns there. that that I would really recommend working with your vet. And the other thing is that vets are really, really eager for feedback on these drugs. The reptile community has an urge to go around the veterinary community as much as they possibly can. And so when I'm asking a lot of the world's most experienced reptile practitioners, and they've been using these drugs for just a few years, and have not gotten a ton of feedback. So if there's anyone out there who gives NexGard to your green tree python or something weird and it falls over dead on you, like, please let the world know about these things.
Yeah.
Talk to your vet, and get this information out there where it's actually useful for people.
I think the hobby, I don't think we necessarily want to go around vets. It's just for the majority of us, there's not strong reptile vets near us, and it's like they're guessing through some of this just with a little bit more of an educated guess than what we are, so I think that's where a lot of this comes from.
It's a big problem. It's a big problem for sure. The relationship between the reptile community and the veterinary community is not as strong as it should be.
Agreed.
There we go. Okay. Any final thoughts or any cleanup you need to do with anything we said where you were like, oh God, we can take it because we want the facts out there. And I'm the one that did most of the talking, and I'm asking you to do that.
No, I think you pretty much covered it. I was just looking at my notes and seeing if there's anything else I really wanted to touch on, but no, you covered most of it with what you were talking about in terms of all the mechanism of action and stuff. If there are any, I can't see the chat. If there are any other questions.
There are just a couple. Here's one. Hold on. I'll add this one. Would atropine peroxydoxime chloride be something that could be applied to organophosphates poisoning in reptiles?
Yeah, so those are the treatments that you could use for organophosphate poisoning, and for certain types of toxins, like for carbaryl, they actually work pretty well. I haven't seen reptiles that have gotten into carbaryl, but I've seen other animals that have gotten into carbaryl and had those drugs work. I don't believe that those drugs would work as well for like a no pest strip kind of toxicity situation. I think that the no pest strips bind much more strongly, and those are not as effective.
Well, I've got a couple in the chat I'm going to throw up there.
Where we were talking about ivermectin and making spray, and how it doesn't mix with water. This isn't something I had heard of before. Is this something you're familiar with, Dr. Woodley?
Yeah, propylene glycol is exactly what you would need. So propylene glycol is the diluent for a lot of these drugs that are not water soluble, that make them injectable for all kinds of things. And that's what a compounding pharmacy is going to use to mix it. So if you have access to propylene glycol, and you can mix some of that in with your ivermectin spray bottle, that'll definitely help significantly in terms of it's a great tool to dilute a lot of lipid soluble drugs, but not widely available. Most people are not going to have it laying around.
Well, I'll tell you, just so we can kind of toss it out there. While we were on the show, I looked up a couple things to see how available it was. And that is one that you can get. Now, there's some that you can only get in like large quantities and it's real expensive. But I found where you can get a gallon of it for, under $100. So there's that. I also found Exalt, if I'm saying that right, where 50 milliliter bottle, it's $170 for 50 milliliters. But it's something you can get your hands on a smaller quantity.
That sounds about right. And if it's actually the brand name, again, I think different states are going to have different regulations on some of these things. But yeah, that's the right stuff.
Cool. Now that would actually be coming from Australia.
So you probably
I've had drugs come over here from Australia specifically. So
you might also have some of them say no, that they won't ship it to you, or that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay. Final.
The
thoughts?
dosages on it are very variable still. So I know I said I don't like giving out dosages, but I'll give you the reason why. As far as I'm aware, there are only 2 studies that have been done on snakes with Flurulaner, so the Exalt. One of them did 40 mgs per kg by mouth. And the other did 2.5 mgs per kg. So 2.5 and 40.
Those are orders of magnitude different.
So anywhere in between.
Both of them had the exact same results. They both worked, and they both did not have any side effects. So we talk about the margin of safety with drugs, the margin between where they work and where you see overdose symptoms. And the margin of safety on a lot of these insecticides is some of the lowest margins of safety out there, where you're riding that edge where they're just barely enough to work and not enough to affect your animal. And it seems like with the isoxazoline drugs, the margin of safety is just much, much, much bigger. So I'm sure that there are going to be more issues out there. But I hope that kind of gives you a little bit of a sense of why I'm hesitant to talk about the actual dose ranges that are being recommended between that kind of range coming from the only published literature and the fact that people don't have a way of actually dosing it from meat flavored pills. I think it's a little bit premature to talk about exact dosing.
But it's cool that we talked about it on June 23rd, 2026, because who knows, 5 years from now, we all might be like, why the hell did they do a Mite episode? Which would be
don't exist anymore.
Yeah. I can only hope.
Yes, that would be great. All right. Well, thank you, sir. Thank you for, staying up late. I know you got a busy day probably tomorrow, like all of us, but we greatly appreciate you and what you do and being the vet for our show and Colubrid Fest, which Dr. Whitman will be at. So you like this Mite stuff, talk to him because he'll be there. So, yeah. All righty. Well, have a good night. Thank you, man.
Thanks very much, guys.
Okay. Bye-bye. All right. Oh, there we go. Okay. So we ended on a high note, but the rest of it was a little, makes your skin crawl a little bit. But yes, the Mite episode, I believe we can put this thing to rest. The final thing I want to read, the last thing, is from Dr. Warren Booth, who, and I got to put the readers on, said, remember to also emphasize the danger of bringing mites back from shows or other collections. Due to their size, they move via static electricity, especially the nymphs, but adults also. So you don't need to hold a reptile at a show to attract them. You just need to be near an enclosure or walking past that Muppet with the ball python or iguana on their shoulder. So basically, the python, in my case, it was a freaking white-lit python, which is about the worst python you can have around your freaking neck. There was a show up, it doesn't exist anymore, but every freaking time Colin and I would go to it, there's some walking around with a 7-foot D'Albert's python. But you get close to that, whoop, they just come on over. You don't even have to touch the damn reptiles. That's how effective they are at getting on you. So take a shower after the show, which most of us do anyway. So on that note, anything you want to add as final thoughts? I'm pretty much done.
I'll say just simply, one, I want to thank so much participation that was happening in the chat tonight.
Yes.
I mean, because there were things that obviously we were able to pull straight in to the show and get some discussion on. So, I mean, that's fantastic. I also want to thank the listeners that aren't the Colubrid keepers, because I know that we either had more tonight or there are some that are going to filter over to this episode, because this is obviously something that spreads across the entire reptile community, not just colubrids by any means, whatsoever. And as Dr. Whitman said, share your experiences, share it with the vets, share it with one another. I mean, this is how we learn what's working, what's not working. And this again is something that if you see a mite in your collection, you're not a dirty person. You're not a crappy keeper. It happens. it happens to all of us. So, don't hang your head in shame. Instead, if you are unsure on how to deal with it, reach out to experienced keepers, reach out to your veterinarian. Let's just attack it, and let's get this done. So I hope that this episode I hope it came across to everyone the way we've wanted it to, because it was definitely an important episode for us. So,
yeah. And I like doing the deep dives. So put in the comments things you'd like CCR to do deep dives on. And we will be doing these as long as the podcast exists. We just won't do them every time because they take a little bit of effort. But anything herpetoculture related that you want us to go out into the community, we could not have done this without Dr. Warren Booth. So thanks for talking with me, Warren. We couldn't do this without Dr. Whitman. So thanks, Zac, for talking with me earlier. And Whitman's so awesome. He actually reached out to I had opened up Facebook Messenger to message him. I told Clint this. It was almost freaky to see if he'd be willing to come on. And I had like a multi-paragraph message from him earlier that day saying that, here's some stuff you might want to say. And I was like, oh, no.
You're going to say
you want to come on.
I love that.
That is above my pay grade, my friend. And so thank you for coming on and giving a vet perspective, especially coming from a vet as good as you. So with that being said, where can people find you, Clint?
You can always find us at Metazotics.com if you want to see what we've got available. But you can reach me at Metazotics at Gmail, Facebook, we're Metazotics, and on Instagram, MetazoticsLLC.
All right. And you can find me on Instagram at Dr. Crawdad, on Facebook, Zac Loughman. As always, if you're a young person, know a young person, have a young person in your life that wants to work with snakes, reptiles, amphibians, work in the field and conservation, and have a curriculum where they're literally going to have college classes about animals every semester they're in college. Please consider West Liberty University. The zoo science majors and the grad program, I'm in charge of them. So if you like listening to me jabberjaw, you only get to take 6 classes with me as an undergrad. So there's that. But please consider coming to the school. And Colubrid Fest and IHS, if you like this presentation, you will love Colubrid Fest and IHS. So consider going to them. IHS is about to sell out, which has not happened in the past 5 years. Clint might have a little to do with that.
It's a whole group effort. You know what I mean?
It's a team effort.
Yes, there's a great group of people that are really pushing IHS forward. The board members are all passionate. I think that that organization is now it's coming into its new age.
Yes.
And is really found its footing on what it needs to be. Basically what it has been brought back.
We're coming back to basics.
And I think that it's definitely hit its stride in the individuals who have worked at finding the footing. I tip my hat to everybody involved. Yes. It's been incredible.
Yeah. And we'll have the president, Mike Clarkson, on really soon to plug coming to the meeting, because there's not many tickets left. But there are tickets left for Colubrid Fest. So buy your ticket. Consider that. And there will be many conversations just like this there. So be it morning, evening, afternoon, whatever time of day it is, have a good one. And we will see you on the next episode of Colubrid and Colubroid Radio.